Take your hands off of my employee. The three words came out quiet. No raised voice, no table slammed. Just a 65-year-old man setting down a beer glass with the kind of stillness that made the entire bar go cold. Travis Kane turned around, looked at the old bartender standing behind the counter, and then did something that would cost him everything. He laughed. If you're watching this from your city, drop it in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and stay with me until the very last word. You won't want to walk away from this one. The heat that rolled off the Arizona desert on a Friday evening wasn't the kind you complained about. It was the kind you carried in your lungs, the kind that pressed against the back of your neck and stayed there like a hand that refused to lift. By 7 o'clock, the air outside the Dust Devil Roadhouse had already baked everything it touched into something dry and brittle. And the neon sign above the door buzzed and flickered the way it always did when the temperature climbed past 100 and the generator worked twice as hard to keep the beer cold. Ashley Monroe had been on her feet since noon. She hadn't eaten since breakfast. A half piece of toast she'd cut in two because Danny had wanted the other half, and she wasn't about to tell an 8-year-old that money was tight again. She'd pulled her blonde hair back before her shift with a rubber band she'd found at the bottom of her purse. And by 7 that evening, half of it had slipped free and hung against the side of her face in the kind of way that made her look younger than 24, more exhausted than she wanted anyone to notice. She loaded a tray with 4 long neck bottles and carried them to the corner booth without spilling a drop. That was one thing about Ashley Monroe. Whatever else was falling apart in her life, her hands stayed steady. "You're a lifesaver," said the trucker in the window seat. Big man, work-roughened hands, a faded cap that read something agricultural across the front. "Just doing my job," she said, and she smiled the way she always smiled at customers. Not fake, not forced, but measured. Like she'd learned early that warmth was a resource, and you had to spend it carefully. The Dust Devil wasn't a beautiful bar. It had never pretended to be. The wooden floor had been warped and re-nailed so many times that certain boards sang underfoot if you hit them at the wrong angle. The pool table in the far corner leaned slightly to the left, a problem everyone had accepted so completely that regulars automatically compensated when they lined up their shots. The walls held a collection of mounted antlers, sun-bleached license plates, and photographs of the highway outside in every decade going back to the 1950s, when Silver Creek, Arizona was little more than a fuel stop with ambitions. But the Dust Devil had something that couldn't be nailed to a wall or poured into a glass. It had Jack. Jack Mercer stood behind his bar the way a man stands inside his own skin, completely without apology, without any apparent need for the world to rearrange itself on his behalf. He was 65 years old and built like something carved rather than born, the kind of lean that comes not from deprivation, but from decades of use of physical life lived without excess or decoration. His hands were large and quiet. His gray hair was cut close. He had a face that had weathered everything the desert and the years could throw at it and come out looking not beaten, but settled the way stone looks after a river has run over it for long enough. I didn't talk much. He didn't need to. Ashley had been working the Dust Devil for 6 weeks, and she had already understood something about Jack Mercer that most people took months to figure out, that his silence was not emptiness. It was the opposite of emptiness. It was the kind of quiet that a person arrives at only after they have been through enough noise to last several lifetimes. She liked him. More than liked him. She trusted him, which was something she did not give easily, not after the last 2 years of her life. Her parents had died 14 months apart, her father from a cardiac event on a Tuesday morning with his boots still on her, mother from a grief that disguised itself as pneumonia 6 months after the funeral. Ashley had been 22 years old when the second casket went into the ground, standing in the cold in a black dress that didn't fit right, holding her 7-year-old brother's hand, and understanding with the particular clarity that loss produces that she was now all he had. Danny was 8 now. He was in 3rd grade. He liked dinosaurs with a focused encyclopedic passion that made Ashley secretly proud every time he corrected her on the difference between a brachiosaurus and an apatosaurus. He had their father's eyes and their mother's stubbornness, and Ashley had arranged her entire existence around keeping him fed-housed and enrolled in the school where his teacher, Mrs. Calloway, had taken a particular interest in him. The Dust Devil paid $11 an hour plus tips. It was enough. Barely, but enough. And Jack had never once made her feel like she was lucky to have the job. He made her feel like the job was lucky to have her, which was a distinction that mattered more than she could easily explain. By 7:30, the bar had filled to its comfortable middle, not packed, not sparse. A table of ranchers near the window. A couple of bikers at the bar who'd been riding through and stopped for dinner. Three men in their 50s playing a slow, deliberate game of pool and not talking much about anything. The television above the bar ran a baseball game with the sound low. Ashley was refilling the rancher's water glasses when the door opened. She noticed it the way you notice a change in air pressure. Not loud, not dramatic, just different. Travis Kane walked in like a man who had recently decided he owned every room he entered and had not yet encountered enough resistance to question that conclusion. He was 31 years old, medium height, the kind of physically present that comes from hours in a gym and a vanity that required an audience. He had dark hair slicked back from his face and a jaw that looked like it had been set permanently in the direction of confrontation. Behind him came two men, Denny Pruitt and Carl Voss, both bigger than Travis in raw physical terms, both carrying themselves two careful steps behind him in the way that indicated he was in charge and they were glad not to be. Ashley had seen them before. 3 weeks ago, Travis Kane had come in on a Tuesday afternoon and asked to speak to the owner. Jack had come out from the back, dried his hands on a bar rag, and listened to 4 minutes of what Travis called a business proposition, and Jack called something else entirely, though he didn't say what. He'd told Travis no. He'd said it the same way he said most things, quietly, without aggression, without elaboration. Travis had smiled in a way that didn't reach any part of his face above his mouth and said, "Think it over, old man. We'll be back." Jack had gone back to what he was doing. He'd told Ashley afterward when she asked, "Don't worry about it." She had worried about it. Now Travis crossed the floor with his hands in his jacket pockets and his eyes finding Ashley before they found anything else in the room. That detail registered somewhere below her conscious mind that her face was what he looked for first, and it made the fine hairs on her arms rise slightly. "Where's the old man?" Travis said. His voice carried across the bar. Not loud, but deliberately pitched to travel. He wanted people to hear him. He wanted people to know he was not someone who lowered his voice in other people's spaces. "Mr. Mercer's in the back," Ashley said. "Can I help you with something?" "Yeah." Travis stopped 2 feet in front of her. "You can tell him Travis Kane is here to collect. I can let him know you'd like to speak with him." "I just said collect." Travis tilted his head slightly. "You know what that means, right? Collection? Money, the arrangement we made." "I'm not aware of any arrangement," Ashley said. Her voice came out steady. She was quietly grateful for that. Whatever her hands did or didn't do, she needed her voice to hold, and it did. "You're not aware," Travis repeated, and he looked back at Denny and Carl with an expression that performed amusement for their benefit. "She's not aware? That's funny." He turned back to her. "Go get the old man. Tell him this isn't optional anymore." Ashley set her tray down on the nearest table and walked to the back. Jack was in his office, a room barely large enough for a desk and a filing cabinet, doing what he did every Friday evening, going through the week's receipts, with a patience that suggested he genuinely found the task worthwhile. He looked up when Ashley appeared in the doorway. "Travis Kane," she said. "He's here to collect." Jack looked at her for a moment. "You okay?" "I'm fine. Jack, there are 3 of them." "There were 3 last time, too." Jack set his pen down. He pressed both palms against the desktop and pushed himself up. Not with difficulty, but with the deliberate economy of a man who didn't waste movement. "Go pour the Hendersons another round. On the house tonight." "Jack, go on." He walked out past her, and she stood for a moment in the doorway of his empty office, looking at the old steel locker in the corner. She didn't know what was in it. She had never asked. There was something about it, the way the combination lock was the only thing in the office that showed no dust, as though Jack touched it regularly even if he never opened it, that told her it was not a question to ask yet. She went and poured the Hendersons their beer. Jack walked to the bar. He stood behind the counter and looked at Travis Kane the way a man looks at weather he has seen before and knows how to wait out. "Mr. Kane," he said. "Jack." Travis moved to the bar and put both hands flat on the counter, leaning in as though proximity would accomplish what words hadn't managed yet. "I've been patient. I've been patient for 4 weeks, and I'm done being patient. This isn't personal. Every place on this highway pays. You pay. We make sure nothing happens to your establishment. You don't pay." He spread his hands. "Bad things happen in the desert." "I heard you the first time," Jack said. The answer is still no. That's a mistake. Maybe. It's not a maybe. Travis pushed off the counter and straightened. The performance was slipping slightly, the smile tightening around the edges, the charm working harder than it should have needed to. You're a 65-year-old man running a bar in the middle of nowhere. You don't have the kind of friends who make problems go away. You're alone out here, Jack, and alone is dangerous. Order something or leave, Jack said. Either one is fine. The bar had gone quiet. Not the quiet of people who stopped caring. The quiet of people who had stopped pretending not to listen, who were sitting very still, because something in the air had shifted and they were trying to determine which direction was going to require them to move. Travis Kane heard it, he felt it, and something in him, that part of men like him that requires an audience and requires the audience to be impressed, decided it was time to change the nature of the conversation. He turned. He looked at Ashley. She was behind the bar refilling the Henderson's mugs, and she was doing it with the studied calm of someone who was very much aware of being looked at and very much determined not to show it. Her back was three-quarters turned to Travis. Her hands were steady. He walked toward her. She heard him coming before she saw him. The quality of the floor's silence changed when he crossed it, boots heavier, with intention. And she turned, keeping her expression neutral, keeping the mug in her hand, keeping her voice somewhere in the vicinity of steady, when she said, "Can I get you something?" Travis reached out and picked up the receipt pad from the bar beside her hand. He held it up, looked at it, set it back down. A demonstration of casual ownership. A way of touching her world without touching her, yet. "Pretty girl like you," he said, "working a place like this, that's a waste." "I like my job," Ashley said. "Jack paying you enough to make this worth it. That's between me and Mr. Mercer. Because I could pay you more." Travis was close now, closer than a conversation required, closer than anything except intent requires. There are better places to be than out here in the heat serving beer to men who leave dollar tips. "I said I like my job." "Yeah, you said that." Travis picked up her receipt pad again. This time he didn't put it back. He turned it over in his hands. "What's your name?" "Ashley." "Ashley." He said it like he was tasting it, deciding whether it suited him. "Here's the thing, Ashley, your boss has a problem, and his problem is about to become your problem. And I'd hate for a pretty girl who likes her job to end up in a bad situation because her old boss made a bad decision." "You should probably give that back," Ashley said, indicating the pad. Travis looked at her for a long moment. Then he threw the pad on the floor. The sound of it hitting the boards was small, almost nothing, and it was somehow the loudest thing that had happened in the room all evening. Two of the ranchers shifted in their seats. The pool players had put their cues down. Ashley did not move to pick it up. She held Travis Kane's gaze with a steadiness she was borrowing from somewhere she could not name, from her father, maybe, who had never in her memory been the first to look away from a hard thing. "Pick it up," Travis said. "No," said Ashley. The word was quiet. It was also entirely without negotiation. Travis stared at her. The expression on his face cycled through several emotions in rapid succession: surprise, irritation, the specific male fury of a man who is accustomed to compliance and has just encountered its absence. And then he reached out and grabbed her by the hair. The scream that went through the bar wasn't Ashley's. She made no sound when his fist closed in her hair and yanked her sideways. No scream, only a sharp inhale that she cut off immediately, the way a person does when they have decided they will not give something what it wants. The scream came from a young woman at the table closest to the bar, a rancher's wife who had come in with her husband for a Friday dinner and found herself watching something she could not process. Travis pulled Ashley across the bar floor by her hair. She twisted, tried to get her feet under her properly, managed to stay upright for 4 stumbling steps before he pivoted and shoved her hard against the edge of the pool table. She hit it at the hip, a crack of pain that radiated up through her side, and then Travis had both hands on her shoulders and drove her down onto the felt. The billiard ball scattered with a hard clatter. "You want to tell me no again?" Travis's voice had dropped. It was no longer performing for anyone. It was low and flat and specific in the way that danger becomes specific when it stops bothering to perform. "Go ahead, tell me no again." Ashley looked up at him. Her eyes were bright, not with fear, though the fear was there, a cold-specific weight in her chest, but with something that was also not fear. Something that looked, if you caught it at the right angle, a great deal like refusal. No, she said. Travis hit her. It was not the first time she'd been struck. That made it slightly easier to endure and not at all easier to accept. She turned her face with the impact and tasted copper and felt the specific distant ringing in her skull that told her the blow had been harder than she wanted to admit. The bar erupted, shouting chairs, scraping at least two people standing, but no one came forward. No one moved toward the pool table. Because Denny and Carl had positioned themselves with the wordless efficiency of men who had done this before, and the message their bodies delivered to everyone in the room was very clear. Stay and watch, and do not make this worse. Ashley pressed her palms against the pool table's felt and pushed herself up. Travis shoved her back down. Where is it? He said. Where is what? The cash box, Friday nights. He grabbed her arm. Don't make me explain this twice. There's no cash box, Ashley said. And this was technically true. Jack kept the week's receipts in a safety deposit bag in the office safe. But Travis's hand tightened on her arm until she felt the bones flex in a way that made her breath catch. Last chance, he said. And that was when the bar went very, very quiet. Because behind the counter, Jack Mercer had set down the beer glass he was drying. He set it down on the bar with a sound that was barely a sound at all, the softest possible impact of glass on wood. And he looked across the room at Travis Kane with an expression that Ashley, from where she lay on the pool table, could not fully see, but could somehow entirely read. Take your hands off my employee. 3 words, quiet as a door closing. Travis turned his head slowly. He looked at Jack the way you look at something that has made an unexpected noise, with that specific mixture of surprise and contempt that men like Travis Kane wear like armor. He released Ashley's arm. He stood up straight. He looked at Denny. He looked at Carl, and then he began to laugh. It started in his chest. It worked its way up. By the time it reached his face, it was fully formed, broad and loose, the laughter of a man who has just been handed a gift he didn't expect. Old man, Travis said, you need to think very carefully about what you're doing right now. Jack didn't answer. He came around the bar. He walked at the same pace he always walked. He didn't rush. He didn't slow down. He crossed the floor of the Dust Devil Roadhouse the way he had crossed it 10,000 times before, with the same economy of movement, the same complete absence of theater, and he stopped 6 feet from Travis Kane and looked at him. You're going to leave, Jack said. All 3 of you. Travis looked him up and down. Yeah. And what happens if we don't? Jack looked at him for a long moment. His expression didn't change. His hands stayed at his sides, and something in the stillness of him, something that couldn't be identified or defined, only felt a quality of complete and utter calm that was somehow more unsettling than any display of force made Denny Pruitt, standing 6 feet away, take a single involuntary step backward. Denny didn't notice himself do it. Travis did. Travis noticed it, and it made him angry because it was the first crack in the evening's architecture, and it had come from his own man, and men like Travis Kane cannot afford cracks, not in public, not with an audience. Carl, Travis said, introduce yourself. Carl was 6'2" and 240 pounds, and he had been asked to introduce himself to many things in the previous 3 years of his employment with Travis Kane, and those introductions had never lasted long and had never ended well for the other party. He came forward. What happened next took approximately 4 seconds. Ashley, still on the pool table, pushing herself upright, saw it without understanding all of it. She saw Carl reach for Jack. She saw Jack move not fast exactly, but precise. The way a key moves in a lock it was made for, and then Carl's momentum was being redirected rather than stopped his own weight doing the work. And he hit the floor hard enough to rattle the mounted license plates on the wall 3 feet above him. The bar did not breathe. Carl lay on the floor and did not immediately get up. Jack stood where he had been standing. His hands were at his sides again. His breathing was unchanged. Travis stared. And something happened in Travis Kane's face in that moment. Something shifted, some small but foundational thing that had been load-bearing in his self-understanding, because he had seen men fight, and he had seen men brawl, and he had seen everything that anger and adrenaline and physical size could produce, but he had never in his life seen what he had just seen, which was not fighting at all, which was something so far past fighting that it didn't need a name. Get up, Travis said to Carl. Carl was getting up, slowly. Jack had not moved. You're making a very big mistake, Travis said, and his voice was controlled, but the control cost him something now. The mistake was yours, Jack said, 30 seconds ago when you put your hands on her. Travis's jaw tightened. You don't know who I am. I know exactly who you are, Jack said, and I know who your uncle is. And I'm telling you for the last time I'm going to tell you anything, take your men and go. Something moved across Travis's face. A shadow. Some recognition of something he didn't entirely understand but couldn't entirely dismiss. He looked at Carl, who was up right now and breathing hard. He looked at Denny, who had both his hands visible and was watching Jack with an expression that had nothing to do with bravado and everything to do with instinct. Travis looked at Jack. We'll be back, he said. I know, Jack said. Travis turned. He went to the door. Carl and Denny followed. The door swung shut behind them and the neon sign outside buzzed, and the baseball game on the TV murmured on, and the Dust Devil Roadhouse exhaled. Ashley dropped off the pool table and caught the edge of it when her legs threatened to do something other than hold her. The pain in her side had sharpened into something that would require attention. Her lip was swelling. She pressed the back of her hand against it and looked at Jack, who had turned to find her already. He crossed the room to her in 8 steps. Let me see, he said quietly. I'm okay. Let me see Ashley. She turned her face and let him look, and he studied her with the same calm attention he brought to everything, his eyes moving over the damage was something that was not distress exactly, but was its structural equivalent, a very deep, very controlled version of the thing that does not change what it needs to do, but does not pretend either to feel nothing. Nothing's broken, he said. How do you know? I know. He stepped back. Sit down. I need to take the Hendersons their tab. The Hendersons can wait. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Sit down. She sat. He got ice from behind the bar and wrapped it in a bar rag and handed it to her without ceremony, without excess sympathy, without the kind of careful handling that would have made her feel fragile. He handed her the ice the same way he handed her a bar rag to restock the counter, practically as to someone who could be trusted to manage themselves. She pressed it to her lip and looked at him. Jack, she said, they're coming back. I know. They have more men. Travis's uncle, I've heard people talk about Roy Kane. He's not, I know who Roy Kane is. Then you know we can't jack the bar. My job. She stopped herself, pressed the ice harder against her lip as though the pain was something she could interrupt. I need this job. Danny needs me to have this job. And if they come back and there's no one here who can, there will be, Jack said. He sat it with such complete quietness, such utter absence of drama or reassurance, seeking that it arrived differently than reassurance usually does. It arrived like a fact. Ashley looked at him. In the weak overhead light of the Dust Devil, with the baseball game murmuring and the ice numbing her lip and the faint sounds of the highway outside drifting in under the door. She looked at Jack Mercer and felt with a certainty she couldn't justify, and didn't try to, that he was telling her the exact truth, that he had said it not to make her feel better, but because it was simply straightforwardly true. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. He went back behind the bar. After a moment, Ashley stood up. She straightened her shirt. She picked up her tray from where she left it on the Hendersons' table, and she carried it to the back and loaded it fresh and carried it out again. She was still shaking slightly. She didn't show it. She served the rest of the night on steady feet with a swollen lip and ice melt drying on the back of her wrist, and the absolute conviction not hoped for, not prayed for, but believed in the way you believe in the ground under your feet, that the old man behind the bar was more than he appeared to be. She didn't know yet how much more. But the desert night pressed against the windows of the Dust Devil Roadhouse, and somewhere outside under a sky full of stars that had been watching this particular stretch of highway for longer than anyone could remember, the sound of 3 car doors closing and 3 engines turning drifted away towards Silver Creek. And behind the bar, Jack Mercer picked up a new glass and began to dry it. His hands were perfectly still. The ice pack Jack had given her lasted until closing time. The bruise it left behind lasted considerably longer. Ashley drove home that night with one hand on the wheel and the other pressed against her ribs where she'd caught the edge of the pool table, testing the pain, the way you test a loose tooth, not because you expect it to feel better, but because you need to know exactly what you're dealing with. The highway between Silver Creek and the small house she rented on Cutter Road was 17 miles of absolute darkness, broken only by her headlights and the occasional reflective glint of a road sign. And she spent those 17 miles running through the evening with the methodical precision of someone who cannot afford to be surprised by the same thing twice. Travis Kane was going to come back. That was not a question. That was arithmetic. She pulled into her driveway and sat in the car for a moment after she killed the engine, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. Through the front window, she could see the blue flicker of the television. Danny had fallen asleep on the couch again, which meant Mrs. Patterson from next door had let herself in with the spare key as she did on Friday nights. When Ashley's shift ran late, sat with him until he fell asleep and left the television on because Danny didn't like the house completely silent. Ashley loved Mrs. Patterson with a specific and practical love that she had no adequate words for. She went inside and carried Danny to his bed without waking him. He was getting heavy. In 6 months, she wasn't going to be able to do this anymore. And she was aware of that the way you're aware of things you're not ready to be done with yet. She pulled the covers up to his chin and stood looking at him in the dim hallway light, the even breathing, the open hand resting on the pillow beside his face, the complete and absolute trust of a sleeping child, and something tightened in her chest that had nothing to do with the bruise. She went to the kitchen and stood at the sink and ran cold water over her wrist for a while. The swelling on her lip had gone down. The ribs would be sore for a week. She thought about Jack. She thought about the way Carl had hit the floor. She thought about what Jack had said. There will be. She didn't sleep well, but she slept. The next morning, she called the bar before her shift, and Jack answered on the second ring, which meant he was already there, which meant he had probably been there since 6, which was his habit, regardless of what the previous evening had brought. "How are you doing?" she asked. "Fine," he said. "You begin. My ribs are bruised, not broken." A pause. "I checked." "Good." "Jack." She sat down at the kitchen table. Danny was still asleep. The house was quiet in the particular way Saturday mornings are quiet in small houses with no adults to fill them. "I want to know if you have a plan." A brief silence. "Come in at noon. We'll talk." "That's not noon, Ashley." She came in at noon. The bar was empty at that hour. Jack didn't open until 2 on Saturdays, and the two of them sat at the counter with coffee and the particular unguarded quality that empty rooms produce in people who spend most of their time performing competence for others. Ashley wrapped both hands around her mug. Jack sat across the bar with his, and he looked at her the way he sometimes looked at the highway through the front window, not like he was avoiding something, but like he was measuring it. "Tell me about Roy Kane," she said. "What do you know?" "I know he runs 3 businesses in Silver Creek that aren't really businesses. I know that every place on the highway between here and Tucson has been paying him since last spring. I know that 2 of those places had incidents before they started paying. Mel's Auto had a fire and the Sunrise Diner had its windows put through 3 separate times in 1 month. Jack's expression didn't change. "You've been paying attention." "I've been scared," she said plainly. "Scared people pay attention." He turned his coffee mug in a slow circle on the counter. "Roy Kane has been building this operation for about 8 months. He uses his nephew for collections because Travis likes the work, likes it enough that Roy has to moderate him sometimes. Travis enjoys hurting people more than he enjoys getting paid." "How do you know that?" "I've seen his type before." "His type?" Ashley set her mug down. "Jack, I've been working for you for 6 weeks. In 6 weeks, I've learned you make the best brisket sandwich west of Texas. You never shortchange anyone on a pour. And you have a combination lock on a locker in your office that you clean with a cloth every Thursday, whether or not you open it. That's what I know about you. That and whatever it was you did to Carl last night, which I watched happen and still can't entirely explain." Jack looked at her. Something moved in his face, not discomfort, but its more dignified relative. The expression of a man who has decided a thing and is now taking the final measure of whether the decision holds. "What do you want to know?" he asked. "Who are you?" Ashley said. "Actually." The silence lasted long enough that she thought he might not answer. "A man who made different choices a long time ago," Jack said, "and who has been trying for about 15 years to make better ones. Different choices like the kind you can't fully walk back from," he said. "Like the kind that stay with you whether you want them to or not. Like the kind—" He stopped. He picked up his coffee. He set it back down. "I rode for 30 years. I made chapter president at 38. I ran the Western chapter of the Hells Angels for 11 years. And the things I did in those years, the things I sanctioned, the things I looked away from, the things I told myself were necessary, they're still real, Ashley. They happened. I can't make them unhappen. Ashley sat very still. At 52, Jack continued, I lost someone I should have protected, and I decided I was done. I walked, which is not something you do lightly and not something the club takes easily. It took 2 years to negotiate, and it cost me every relationship I had, nearly my life twice, and everything I'd built in 3 decades. I bought this bar because it was in the middle of nowhere, and I knew the desert, and I was tired of being known. 15 years, Ashley said. 15 years. And Travis Kane doesn't know. Travis Kane is 31 years old and grew up in Maricopa County, Jack said. He's never been west of Nevada. His uncle has a smarter operation than his nephew, but Roy's been inside twice and he keeps his head down. They move in spaces where my name means nothing. But last night Travis made a mistake, Jack said. He came here and he put his hands on you, and he did it in front of witnesses. And the kind of mistake that is for the people who know what it means is not a small one. Ashley felt something shift in the air between them. What kind of mistake? Jack looked at her for a long moment. The kind, he said carefully, that sends a message whether I intend it to or not. She didn't fully understand that yet. She would. The first window went through that same Saturday night, 40 minutes after closing. Ashley was still there restocking the bar when the rock came through the glass above the pool table. It hit the floor and skidded under the table and left a cold draft moving through the room, and she stood for a full 3 seconds doing nothing because the sound had bypassed her thinking brain entirely and gone straight to the part of her that was made of nerve endings and childhood, and the memory of her father's voice saying, "Don't panic. Think first, panic after." Jack came out of the back. He looked at the window. He looked at Ashley. "You okay?" "Yes." A pause. "Yes." I went and got the tarp from the storage room and covered the window with it and weighed the bottom with bar stools, and they finished restocking in silence. And Ashley drove home in the dark and sat in her car again for a minute before going inside. And this time it wasn't the ache in her ribs that kept her there, but the knowledge fully arrived now, no longer avoidable, that this was going to get worse before it was over. The next week moved with the particular cruelty of weeks that you are wading through. On Monday, Danny's teacher, Mrs. Calloway, called Ashley's cell during her afternoon break and said Danny had been distracted in class and asked if everything was okay at home. Ashley said everything was fine, thanked her, and stood in the parking lot for 2 minutes after hanging up, pressing her free hand flat against the side of her car as though the solid metal of it could transfer some of its properties to her. On Tuesday, Roy Kane's accountant, a thin man in his 50s named Gerald Pratt, who did the paperwork on 3 of Roy's legitimate-facing operations, walked into the Dust Devil at 11 in the morning and sat down at the bar and ordered a coffee and said quietly and without preamble that he'd been asked to extend a professional courtesy and let Jack know that the offer for protection services was being revised upward and was now non-negotiable, and that the window should be understood as a preliminary demonstration and not the scope of what was available to demonstrate. Jack poured him the coffee. "Drink it," Jack said. "Then go back and tell Roy I said no." Gerald Pratt drank the coffee. He left a $5 bill on the counter, which was twice what the coffee cost, and walked out without another word. And Ashley, who had been wiping down the far end of the bar and pretending not to hear any of it, watched him go and felt the fear she had been managing all week sharpen into something with edges. "Jack," she said, "I heard it. Non-negotiable." He said non-negotiable. "I know what non-negotiable means." "Then why?" She came down the bar toward him and kept her voice low even though the bar was empty. "Jack, why are we not paying? I know it feels wrong. I know it is wrong. But Danny is 8 years old and I need this job and I need to not." She stopped, pressed her lips together, tried again. "There are people who fight these things and there are people who survive these things, and I am trying to do the second one." Jack turned to look at her fully. He didn't speak for a moment, and what moved across his face during that silence was something she hadn't seen there before. Not anger, not resolution, but something older than both. The look of a man revisiting a decision he thought he'd already made forever, and finding it had come back asking to be made again. "My wife's name was Carol," he said. Ashley blinked. "Jack, she ran a diner," he said. "Smaller than this, up in Nevada outside Reno. She was not in the life. She never had anything to do with the club or the things the club did. She was a woman who ran a good diner and made the best pie in 3 counties. And she had exactly the same conversation with a man like Roy Kane in exactly the same tone you're using right now. And she paid. He paused. She paid because she was practical and she was tired and she needed to survive. And paying bought her 4 months of quiet, and then they wanted more, and she paid that too, and then they wanted more still, and eventually wanting more ran out of patience and turned into taking it. And on a Tuesday morning, when I was 2 states away doing something I shouldn't have been doing, 3 men came into her diner and they took everything she had, and she tried to stop them. He stopped. The silence in the dust devil was total. Ashley didn't move. She didn't survive it, Jack said. The words landed with a weight that was entirely without drama, which made them heavier than drama could have made them. I'm sorry, Ashley said. She meant it with everything she had. So am I. He turned back to the bar. I buried her and I came back and I handled it the way I handled things then, and I'm not proud of that either. But I made a promise after that I would never again, not once, not in any circumstance, allow fear to be the reason. Decent people handed their dignity to men who deserved nothing. Not pay, not compliance. Nothing. Ashley stood with her hand on the bar for a long moment. Okay, she said finally. Okay. Okay. She straightened. Then we don't pay. Jack looked at her. Something in his face shifted, not surprise, not quite, but its neighbor. The recognition of something he hadn't anticipated. It might get bad, he said. It's already bad, Ashley said. Danny needs me whole, not just surviving. There's a difference. Jack held her gaze for a moment longer, then he nodded. Once it got bad. By Thursday, 2 of the regulars, who'd been coming to the Dust Devil for years, called to say they wouldn't be coming in for a while. They were apologetic. One of them, Earl Henderson, who'd been having dinner at the same corner table every Thursday since before Ashley was born, left a message that began with "I'm sorry" and ended with "you understand," and was full in the middle of the careful language people use when they want to say they're afraid without having to say they're afraid. By Friday, the parking lot was half as full as it should have been for a Friday. Jack watched the empty tables and said nothing. Ashley watched Jack and said nothing. Between the two of them, they held the silence of the bar's thin night like a rope pulled between them, each keeping tension on their end. That Friday after the last customer left, Ashley was carrying glasses to the back when she stopped in the hallway outside Jack's office. The door was open 3 inches. Through it, she could see the old steel locker in the corner, and she could see Jack standing in front of it. He wasn't opening it. I was just standing in front of it with both hands at his sides, in the particular quality of how he stood, very still, very straight, the way a man stands in front of something that requires him to be better than his first instinct told her something she could not have put into language, but understood completely. He was saying no. To whatever was in that locker and whatever it represented, he was saying no. She backed up 2 steps so her shoes wouldn't announce her on the board she knew would sing, and she went back to the bar and finished the glasses herself and locked the front door and said goodnight from the hallway without looking through his door again. She drove home thinking about Carol. She drove home thinking about a diner outside Reno and a Tuesday morning and a woman who had made the practical choice and paid the price for it anyway. She was 3 miles from her house when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Miss Monroe. The voice was older than Travis Kane's steadier stripped of any performance. The voice of a man who didn't need theater because he had weight. My name is Roy Kane. My nephew tells me you work for Jack Mercer. Ashley's hands tightened on the wheel. What do you want? She said. I want to give you an opportunity that I'm not obligated to give you, Roy said. I want to tell you that what's happening at the Dust Devil is a business matter between me and an old bartender, and that you are not required to be part of it. I want to tell you that a young woman with a younger brother has better uses for her time than working for a man who is going to make a poor decision and pay a significant price for it. You called me to tell me to quit. I called you, Roy said, because I respect practicality, and I believe you're a practical woman. I'm not going to quit, Ashley said. A brief pause. That's disappointing. I imagine it is. Ms. Monroe. The weight in Roy's voice shifted slightly. Not louder, heavier. I know about your brother. I know about the school he attends and the teacher who has taken an interest in him, and the fact that you moved to Silver Creek because the rent is low and the school is good. I know these things because I make it my business to know things. And I want you to understand not as a threat, but as information that the people around us are affected by the choices we make. The line went quiet for a moment. Ashley said very precisely, if you come near my brother, there is no version of this that ends the way you want it to. Another pause. Shorter. Good night, Ms. Monroe, Roy said. He hung up. Ashley pulled over. She sat on the shoulder of the highway in the dark with the engine running and her hands shaking for the first time since the night Travis had grabbed her. And she allowed herself 30 seconds of it, 30 seconds of the full physical undeniable fear that she had been locking behind her sternum since the rock came through the window, and then she picked up her phone and called Jack. He answered on the first ring. Ashley, Roy Kane just called me. A silence. What did he say? She told him. She said it quickly in exactly the way she'd trained herself to report things, all the facts, none of the emotion until the facts were done. When she finished, Jack was quiet for a moment. Where are you? He said. Highway 11, shoulder. I'm fine. Go home. Check on Danny. Lock the doors. Jack. I'll handle Roy Kane. How? Her voice cracked slightly on the word and she hated it and said it anyway. How are you going to handle Roy Kane? He has 20 men. He's been doing this for 8 months and every person he's gone after has paid him or ended up wishing they had. What are you going to do, Jack? Because whatever it is, I need to know because he mentioned Danny's school by name and I need to know what I'm... Ashley. His voice was very quiet. Trust me. She stopped. The highway was dark. The engine hummed. Her hands had stopped shaking while she was talking and had not started again. Okay, she said. Okay. She drove home. She checked all the locks. She stood in Danny's doorway for a long time watching him sleep with his arm around a stuffed dinosaur. He was almost too old for her and had absolutely no intention of giving up. She thought about Roy Kane knowing the name of his school. She thought about Mrs. Calloway saying Danny had been distracted in class. She thought about Jack standing in front of that locker. She went to bed. She didn't sleep. At 2 in the morning, her phone lit up with a text from a number she didn't have saved. 4 words, stay away from Mercer. She stared at it for a long time. Then she put the phone face down on the nightstand and lay in the dark and made in the particular silence of very early morning a decision that was not about survival or practicality or the careful economy of keeping things manageable. She decided she was not going to run. She had run before. After her parents died, she had made the practical choices, cheaper apartment, more hours, fewer arguments with the universe about what she deserved. She had bent and rearranged and adjusted and done everything that keeping Danny safe required of her without complaint and mostly without acknowledgement, because there was no one to acknowledge it, and complaining required energy she couldn't spare. She was done bending. The next morning, she drove Danny to school herself, walked him to the door, had a brief conversation with Mrs. Calloway that revealed nothing except that Ashley Monroe was present and paying attention. And then she drove straight to the Dust Devil and pulled into the parking lot and sat in her car for a moment before going in. Through the window, she could see Jack behind the bar. But he was moving with his usual quiet efficiency, wiping down the counter, setting up for the day, a man entirely at home in the space he inhabited. He hadn't heard her pull in. He didn't know she was watching. She watched him for almost a minute. She thought about Carol. She thought about a diner outside Reno. She thought about what it costs a person to wall off every part of themselves that could be used against them and live inside those walls for 15 years and keep the walls clean and solid and never let anyone close enough to find the door. She thought about what it meant that Jack Mercer had quietly and without fanfare found a young woman with a difficult history and a younger brother to support and given her honest work and treated her like family. She thought about the locker. She got out of her car. She went inside. Jack looked up when she came in. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, directly without embellishment. "You're early," he said. "I know." She sat down at the bar. "Jack, tell me the rest." He set down the rag. He looked at her. He made in the particular stillness of a Monday morning with no customers and the desert heat already building outside whatever decision had been building in him since Friday evening. "The rest," he said. "Who knows you're here?" Ashley said. "The people who would know what last Friday meant. Who knows, and what does it mean that they know?" Jack was quiet for a long moment. "There's a man named Marcus Callahan," he said, "goes by Stone. He's been chapter president of the Western chapter for 9 years. He took over when I left." He paused. We've spoken twice in 15 years. Both times he reached out. Both times I told him I was done. And, and last night Jack said I reached out to him. Ashley sat very still. I didn't ask for anything, Jack said quickly. I told him what was happening. I told him about the extortion operation, about Travis, about Roy Kane. I told him. He stopped. Something moved across his face that she had never seen there before. Something unguarded. I told him a young woman who works for me was threatened, that they used her brother to threaten her, and that I needed him to know. Why, Ashley said, if you weren't asking for anything? Because the Hells Angels have a long memory, Jack said, and because Marcus needed to hear it from me. Not from a rumor, not from someone passing through. From me. What did he say? Jack looked at her. He said, I hear you, President. The word landed strangely in the quiet bar. President, like an old title that had been waiting in a drawer for 15 years, still sharp. Ashley looked at the man across the bar from her, the 65-year-old bartender, with the quiet hands and the steady eyes in the steel locker in his office, and she understood in the sudden and complete way that understanding sometimes arrives, that she had been working not just for a man who had once been something. She had been working for a man who, to the people who mattered in ways she was only beginning to comprehend, still was. Jack, she said carefully, what happens now? Jack picked up the bar rag. He resumed wiping down the counter with the same careful attention he brought to everything, the same absolute absence of wasted motion. Now he said, we opened the bar. She worked her shift. She took orders and delivered drinks and made change and smiled at the 3 customers who came in for lunch and the 5 who came in for the afternoon. And she did it all with the particular focused competence she brought to everything. And underneath all of it, she was aware constantly at a low, steady frequency, like a sound below the range of conversation, that something had been set in motion. She didn't know its shape yet. She didn't know its speed. But at 4 o'clock that afternoon, when the parking lot was quiet and the highway outside moved with its normal traffic, a single motorcycle pulled in and parked, and a man in his 40s came inside and sat at the bar and ordered a beer and didn't speak to Jack beyond the ordering, and Jack didn't speak to him beyond serving it, and the man drank his beer in 45 minutes and left a 20 on the counter and walked out. Ashley watched Jack after the man left. Jack was looking at the door. His expression was the same as always. Quiet, settled. The expression of a man who has made his decision and is living in the aftermath of it. But his hands, Ashley noticed, had stopped moving. They rested on the counter, flat and still. And she had worked beside this man for 6 weeks, and she had never seen his hands be still the way they were now. Not resting, not waiting, but held. The way you hold something you're not sure you should put down. She said nothing. She went back to work. Outside, the Arizona afternoon did what Arizona afternoons do in late summer. It burned and the highway shimmered, and the desert stretched in every direction with its ancient patient indifference, and somewhere between Silver Creek and the horizon, a sound was building too far off yet to hear, too certain not to feel. The man on the motorcycle didn't come back the next day, or the day after that, but Ashley had felt something in the quality of his visit, the deliberate brevity of it, the $20 left without ceremony, the way he'd glanced once at Jack and then never again, as though the looking had accomplished what it needed to, that told her it wasn't a social call. It was a report. Someone somewhere had wanted to see the dust devil with their own eyes and sent a man to do it. She didn't ask Jack about it. She had learned in the days since their Monday morning conversation that there were things Jack would tell her when he was ready and things he would not tell her, because protecting her from the weight of them was itself a form of care. She had not decided yet whether she agreed with that approach. But she had decided that pushing against it would cost more than it returned. And so she worked her shifts and watched the parking lot and drove Danny to school every morning herself and picked him up every afternoon and told him when he asked why she was doing that now, instead of letting him take the bus that she liked to drive. Danny was 8. He accepted this. He was also 8 in the way that 8-year-olds who have lost both parents are 8 older in some places than his years younger in others, with a particular antenna for the things adults were not saying that had been calibrated by 2 years of adults not saying important things. On Thursday morning, 3 days after the man on the motorcycle had come and gone, Danny looked up from his cereal and said, "Is something wrong at work?" Ashley was making his lunch. She kept her back to him for a beat longer than she should have. "Why do you ask?" she said. "Because you hum when you're nervous. You've been humming for a week." She turned around. He was watching her with their father's eyes, direct, patient, unhurried. "Some people are giving my boss a hard time," she said. "We're handling it." "Is he okay, Mr. Mercer?" "Mr. Mercer is fine. He seems like someone who would be okay," Danny said in the tone of a person delivering a considered assessment. He went back to his cereal. "He has that kind of face." Ashley looked at her brother for a moment at the complete and serious confidence of him and felt something move through her that was half grief and half gratitude and entirely too large for a Thursday morning. "Yeah," she said, "he does." That afternoon, she arrived at the Dust Devil 40 minutes before her shift and found two men in the parking lot, not customers. They were standing outside their car with the deliberate casualness of people performing relaxation while doing something else entirely, watching the entrance, watching the highway, watching the angles. Both of them were in their 30s, built along similar lines to the man who'd come on the motorcycle, and they gave Ashley the same nod as she walked past, that the motorcycle man had given her brief respectful entirely without explanation. She went inside. Jack was behind the bar. "Friends of yours," she said. "They'll move on before the evening shift," Jack said. "That's not what I asked." He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "Friends of mine." She put on her apron. She restocked the napkin holders. She thought about the locker in the back office and the two men in the parking lot and the phone call from Roy Kane 4 nights ago. And she thought about the particular arithmetic of what was building, and she felt not safe, not exactly, but something adjacent to it, something that had a foundation under it, even if she couldn't see the whole structure. 2 hours into her shift, Travis Kane walked in. He came alone. That was the first thing wrong. Travis Kane had not in any of his previous visits come alone. He operated with backup the way certain men operated with cologne reflexively as a form of identity. The fact he walked through the door of the Dust Devil at 6:15 on a Thursday evening without Denny or Carl Long or anyone else behind him meant either that he was more confident than he had any reason to be, or that this wasn't a collection call. Ashley was at a table taking an order. She looked up and saw him and felt her body make the calculation before her mind caught up, weight shifting slightly, shoulders, setting the automatic physical preparation of someone who had been hit by this person before and was not interested in being surprised by it again. Travis didn't look at her. He went to the bar. He sat down on a stool, not the stool closest to the counter, but one seat back, creating a gap that suggested barely negotiation, and he put both hands flat on the bar and looked at Jack with an expression Ashley had not seen on his face before. Something had changed in Travis Kane. She couldn't name it precisely, but the performance that usually animated him, the loose confidence, the studied ease of a man who enjoyed the fact that people were afraid of him, was running at reduced power. What was underneath it, visible now at the edges, was something rawer and less controlled. He was scared. Not of Jack, or not only of Jack, of something else. Something that had arrived in his life in the last 48 hours and rearranged his priorities in ways he hadn't finished processing. Jack set a glass on the bar in front of him. He poured 2 fingers of bourbon without being asked. He put the bottle away. Travis looked at the glass. He didn't pick it up. "I need to know something," Travis said. "Ask," Jack said. "Who you are." Travis's jaw was tight. "I need to know who you actually are, because my uncle got a phone call yesterday from someone in Nevada, and whatever that person said, Roy hasn't slept, and he's been on the phone every hour since, and he won't tell me what it was about, and the 2 guys in your parking lot have been making people nervous all day." Jack said nothing. "There's a name," Travis said. "People keep saying a name. Old-timers. Guys who've been in the life since before I was born. I asked around quietly because whatever is happening, I didn't want to make it bigger. And 3 separate people went very quiet when I described what I saw in this bar last week. The way you moved. What you did to Carl." He paused. "They said a name." "What name?" Jack said. "Mercer." Travis's voice dropped slightly. "They said Mercer. They said it like it meant something, like saying it out loud was a risk." Jack picked up the bar rag. He began wiping the counter with the same quiet attention he always brought to it. He did not confirm anything. He did not deny anything. He wiped the counter and let Travis's words sit in the air between them and waited. "I'm asking you to tell me," Travis said, "because I need to know what I've walked my uncle into. Roy doesn't listen to me. He hasn't for years. But if I can tell him something specific, something concrete, maybe I can," he stopped, work something in his jaw. I need to know if this is the kind of thing that can be fixed. Jack set the rag down. He looked at Travis Kane with an expression that contained no anger, no satisfaction, no desire to perform the moment. He looked at him with the particular directness of a man who has decided to be honest, because honesty in this case is the only useful thing. You know who I am, Jack said. Travis closed his eyes for half a second. Opened them. Yeah. Then you know what last week meant. I didn't know, Travis said. I didn't know when I came in here. I swear to God I didn't know. That doesn't change what you did, Jack said. I know. Travis's hands pressed flat against the bar. I know it doesn't. I'm not here to make excuses. I'm here because Roy is Roy, and he doesn't walk back from things, and he's got 20 men who follow his orders, and he's going to do something in the next 48 hours that I don't think I can stop, and I don't think he understands what it means. He understands more than you think, Jack said. Then why? Because men like your uncle, Jack said very quietly, would rather die on their feet than admit they've made a mistake. I know that particular disease very well. I had it for 30 years. Travis stared at him. Go home, Jack said. I can't just go home, Travis. Get in your car and drive somewhere that isn't here and isn't Roy's house and stay there tonight. That's all I'm going to say to you. Travis looked at him for a long moment. Something worked in his face, the collision of the man he performed being and whatever younger, less constructed version of himself still lived beneath the performance. The version that had been scared enough to walk in here alone and ask a direct question. He picked up the bourbon, he drank it in one swallow. He set the glass down. He left without another word. Ashley watched him go. She walked to the bar and stood across from Jack and said, he was scared. Yes, of you, of what's coming, Jack said. There's a difference. What is coming? Jack looked at her steadily. Nothing that will touch you or Danny if you do what I ask. What do you ask? Tomorrow night, he said, don't come in. Ashley felt the floor of the conversation shift under her. What? Call in, stay home with Danny. I'll handle the evening myself. Jack, I'm not going to leave you. It's not a request I'm making lightly, he said. It's not a request I'm making because I don't trust you. It's a request I'm making because the thing you'd be doing by being here tomorrow night is giving someone a reason to get between me and what I need to do. And I can't have that. I need every variable removed. Ashley stared at him. What are you going to do? She said. Finish it, Jack said. She wanted to push back. She could feel the argument in her chest fully formed and legitimate. She was not a variable to be removed. She was not someone who needed to be managed out of harm's way. She had been in this from the beginning, and she had taken the hit, and she had held her ground, and she had not once asked to be protected from what was happening. But she looked at Jack, and she thought about Carol and about a diner outside Reno, and about the particular economy of what it costs a man to ask for something instead of simply doing it, and she understood that he was not removing her to diminish her. He was removing her because she was the thing in the world he was currently most afraid of losing. Okay, she said. Jack nodded. She served out her shift. She drove home. She made dinner for Danny, and they watched television, and she helped him with his reading homework, and she put him to bed, and she sat in the kitchen in the quiet and looked at her phone and did not call Jack and did not text him and did not drive back to the Dust Devil. And each of those things she did not do cost her something real. She went to bed at 11. At 12:30, her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. She answered anyway because she had been answering unknown numbers since Roy Kane had called, because not answering felt like the kind of avoidance that gets people hurt. Ashley Monroe, a woman's voice. Older, brisk, efficient. Yes. My name is Sandra Reeves. I'm a night dispatcher for Silver Creek Emergency Services. We've had a call come in from the Dust Devil Roadhouse on Highway 11. There's been an incident. Ashley was out of bed before the woman finished the sentence. What kind of incident? She said, and her voice was completely flat, the way voices go when fear has moved past the register of performance and become purely functional. A physical altercation. Multiple parties involved. Ambulance is already on scene. I'm calling because Mr. Mercer listed you as his emergency contact. Ashley stopped breathing for exactly 1 second. Is he? He's ambulatory, the dispatcher said with the practiced neutrality of someone who has learned to deliver information at exactly the pace people can receive it. He's refusing transport. Of course he is, Ashley said. She was pulling on her clothes while she said it. She drove the 17 miles to the Dust Devil in 12 minutes, which was not something she was proud of, and also was not something she would have done differently. The highway was empty of everything except her headlights and the distant red and blue of emergency vehicles pulsing against the flat, dark sky ahead of her. And she drove toward them with both hands on the wheel and her jaw set, in the particular compact fury of a woman who has been told to stay home and has had that instruction violated by the universe. She pulled into the parking lot. It looked like someone had decided to demonstrate the concept of aftermath. There were 2 police cruisers and an ambulance and a fire engine that had apparently come as a precaution. There were 6 men on the ground in various positions of having recently been there involuntarily. There were 2 more being attended to by paramedics. There was a Silver Creek patrol officer talking into his radio near the door, and there was Jack Mercer sitting on the tailgate of a pickup truck with a paramedic crouching in front of him, examining his right hand. Ashley crossed the parking lot in 15 steps. "I told you not to come," Jack said without looking up. "I wasn't here for the incident," Ashley said. "I'm here for the aftermath. There's a difference." She looked at his hand. His knuckles were split in 2 places. "How bad?" "It's not bad," Jack said. "Mr. Mercer," the paramedic said with the resignation of someone who has been having this argument for 4 minutes. "You have a laceration on your hand that requires at minimum butterfly closures and potentially stitches, and I'd like to rule out a fracture." "It's not fractured," Jack said. "With respect, sir, I have an x-ray machine and you have a bar towel." Ashley sat down on the tailgate beside Jack. She looked at the 6 men on the ground. She looked at the officer near the door. She looked at Jack's face, which bore one shallow cut along the cheekbone that was already clotting, and she made the specific assessment of someone who has seen him be hit before and is calibrating what this particular version of damage tells her. "How many of them were there?" she said. 11, Jack said. "Roy sent 11. There are 8 out here. 3 left before the deputies arrived." Ashley looked at him. "You handled 11 men. I handled 8. 3 ran." A pause. "I'm slower than I used to be." "Jack." "The 2 men who were in the parking lot earlier helped," he said, "before you ask." She looked around the parking lot more carefully and spotted them. Now one was talking to an officer near the far cruiser. The other was sitting on the curb with an ice pack against his jaw, but alert, tracking the scene with the practiced attention of someone who was monitoring rather than resting. "Roy Kane," Ashley said. "Not here tonight. Roy doesn't do the work himself. Is he going to send more?" Jack was quiet for a moment. The paramedic had finished with his hand and was making notes on a tablet with the expression of someone documenting things they do not entirely understand. Jack flexed his hand once slowly and looked at it with the expression of a man taking inventory. "No," Jack said, "he's not." "How do you know?" "Because he already knows he lost." Ashley waited. "When Roy's men call him from this parking lot," Jack said, "they're going to tell him that 11 people couldn't finish what Travis started with 1 punch in a bar. They're going to tell him that 2 of his men needed ambulances, and Roy Kane is going to do the math on what that means and what it implies about who he sent his men after, and he's going to understand something he should have understood before any of this started." "What?" "That he picked the wrong place," Jack said. He said it without pride, without satisfaction. "The way you state a fact about the weather." One of the officers was walking toward them now, mid-40s, broad-shouldered, with the particular walk of someone who had been a cop long enough that authority had become postural. He stopped in front of Jack and looked at him for a moment before he spoke. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "I'm going to need a statement." "I know," Jack said. "You want to tell me what happened?" 11 men came onto my property with weapons and with stated intent to destroy my business and harm me. I defended myself and my property. The 2 men," he indicated the pair near the cruiser and the curb, "were here as guests and assisted when the situation escalated." The officer wrote something down. "These 11 men," he looked at the parking lot. "You have any idea who sent them?" "Roy Kane," Jack said. "Silver Creek." The officer's pen paused. "That's a serious accusation," he said. "It's a serious situation," Jack said. "Roy Kane has been running a protection extortion operation on every business on this highway for 8 months. I have the names of 11 other business owners who paid him and can testify to it. What you have tonight is 11 of his employees trespassing on my property with documented intent. That should be enough to start." The officer looked at him steadily. How do you have 11 names? Because Jack said when people know someone is finally willing to stand up, they're willing to talk. Ashley looked at Jack. This was new. This was something she hadn't known. In the time between Monday morning and Friday night, while she'd been watching the parking lot and driving Danny to school and managing her fear with the tools available to her, Jack had been doing something else entirely. He had been making calls, not just to Marcus Callahan, to the business owners on the highway, one by one quietly, the way he did everything. You've been talking to them, she said. Someone had to, Jack said. When? Before and after my shift, he said simply. She looked at him for a long moment. The officer had stepped back to confer with a colleague, giving them a moment of relative privacy. And in that moment, Ashley looked at Jack Mercer, at the split knuckles, and the cut on his cheek, and the paramedic's butterfly closure, and the absolute stillness of him, and felt something crack open in her chest that she hadn't known was sealed. You were building a case, she said. I was doing what should have been done months ago, Jack said. Before it got to windows and threats and, he stopped. Looked at her face, looked at where the bruise had been faded now to a yellow shadow along her cheekbone. Before it got to any of this. The men on the ground, Ashley said. Roy's going to bail them out. Some of them, not all, and not before they've been interviewed, and not before the statements from 11 business owners have been filed, and not before Roy Kane has had a very long night of understanding that this isn't a local problem anymore. Ashley looked at him. Marcus Callahan, she said. Jack said nothing. The phone call Roy got from Nevada, she said. That was Callahan. Jack looked at the highway. I didn't ask him to make it, Jack said. I asked him to know. What he chose to do with knowing that was his. What did he say to Roy? A very long pause. He reminded him, Jack said, that certain things have weight, and that the weight doesn't go away because the person carrying it has been quiet for 15 years. Ashley sat with that for a moment. The emergency lights still pulsed against the flat Arizona sky. One of the men on the ground was being helped to his feet by a paramedic. The officer was back on his radio. The Dust Devil sign buzzed overhead with its habitual flicker, indifferent to everything the evening had produced. I need to tell you something, Ashley said. Jack looked at her. When Travis came in tonight, she said, when he sat down at the bar, I watched his face. He was scared. Not of you specifically, or not only of you. He was scared of having walked into something he didn't understand. And there was a version of him sitting on that stool that was just a 31-year-old man who'd made a series of bad choices and was starting to understand the full accounting of them. I know, Jack said. Does that matter to you? I thought about it. It doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change what needs to happen next. But, he paused. Yeah, it matters. She nodded. They sat in silence for a while, the two of them on the tailgate of the pickup truck, while the organized activity of law enforcement and emergency services moved around them with its purposeful noise. Then the officer came back. He had his notepad and a different expression, not softer exactly, but recalibrated, as though something he'd looked up or been told had adjusted his understanding of the situation. Mr. Mercer said, we're going to need you to come to the station tomorrow morning and give a formal statement. You and the 11 business owners you mentioned. This is going to require a full investigation. I know, Jack said. I'll be there. 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock, Jack agreed. The officer nodded. He started to leave, then stopped. He turned back. He looked at Jack for a moment with the specific look of a man trying to reconcile two things that don't fit comfortably in the same picture. Sir, he said carefully, the men on the ground. Before our units arrived, 11 men with weapons. He looked at Jack's hand, at the paramedic's work on his cheek. You want me to understand that you and 2 friends, Jack said. 2 friends managed this situation before our units arrived. Mostly managed, Jack said. 3 got away. The officer looked at him for a very long moment. 8 o'clock, he said again, and walked away. Ashley watched him go. He has no idea who you are. Good, Jack said. The other officers might. Probably. Is that a problem? Only for Roy Kane, Jack said. She slid off the tailgate. Her legs were steady. The night air had cooled slightly, the way Arizona nights, cool in August not to comfort, but to something 1 degree removed from brutality, and she stood in it and looked at the bar and at the highway and at the man sitting on the tailgate of the pickup truck with butterfly closures on his hand and 15 years of chosen quiet behind him. You need to let the paramedic look at your ribs, she said. My ribs are fine. Jack, Ashley, you took on 11 men tonight. Eight. 8 men and you're 65 years old and you're going to let the paramedic check your ribs, or I'm going to be very disappointed in you. A long pause. That's not a fair argument, Jack said. I know, she said. It's the one I've got. He let the paramedic check his ribs. 2 were badly bruised, 1 possibly cracked, and the paramedic said this in the tone of someone explaining a mild inconvenience, because the alternative expressing the appropriate level of alarm about a 65-year-old man with a cracked rib had clearly already been tried and had produced no useful results. They left the parking lot at 2:30 in the morning, Ashley following Jack's truck in her car all the way to his house on the edge of Silver Creek, a small place with a good porch and a rusted wind chime that turned slowly in the night air. She walked him to the door because he wasn't going to ask her to, but she was also not going to not. He unlocked it. He turned. Thank you, he said. For what? For not staying home. She looked at him. You told me to stay home. I know, Jack said. I'm glad you didn't. She drove home in the deep quiet of an Arizona 2 a.m. and the highway was empty and the stars were extravagant overhead and her hands on the wheel were steady, and she thought about 11 men and a 65-year-old bartender and a phone call from Nevada in the particular way that things which have been building for a long time finally arrive. She thought about the locker, about the faded vest inside it, about the name on the patch that Jack had not worn in 15 years and had touched the combination lock of every Thursday without opening. She thought about Marcus Callahan saying, I hear you, President, and what those 4 words had set in motion. She didn't know yet what was coming, but the sound of it was in the air, low and distant and getting closer. The way a desert storm announces itself, not with rain, but with a change in the quality of everything, a shift in pressure that the skin recognizes before the mind does. She pulled into her driveway. She sat for a moment. She looked at the house where Danny was asleep. She thought we're almost through it. And then the phone rang. She picked it up. Ashley. It was Marcus Callahan's voice. She had never spoken to him, but she recognized it immediately, the specific weight of it, the authority that wasn't performed, but simply present the voice of a man who had spent his adult life being the person other people looked at when they needed to know what to do next. Mr. Callahan, she said. Marcus, he said. We need to talk about tomorrow. There are some things Jack hasn't told you, and I think you should hear them before morning. Ashley gripped the phone. Tell me, she said. Marcus Callahan talked for 22 minutes. Ashley sat in her car in the driveway and listened without interrupting, which was not her natural disposition, but which she understood from the first 30 seconds of his voice was the correct response to this particular man. He spoke the way Jack did economically without decoration, each word carrying its full weight and no borrowed weight from the words around it. But where Jack's quiet came from a man who had chosen stillness, Marcus's came from a man who had simply never needed volume to be heard. Hunt told her things Jack hadn't told her. He told her that when Jack had walked away from the club 15 years ago, it had not been a clean exit, that the negotiations had taken 2 years, not because the club was reluctant to let him go, but because there were men in the organization, men with grievances, men who believed Jack's departure was a form of abandonment, men who had built their own authority on the foundation of Jack's name and felt that foundation shifting when he withdrew it, who wanted the separation to cost him something permanent. That Jack had spent the first 3 years after leaving looking over his shoulder in the specific way that people look when the thing behind them is not imaginary. He told her that Jack had eventually been granted what the club called a clean walk, full separation. No obligation, no claim in either direction, and that this was rare enough to be almost unprecedented, and that it had been granted not out of sentiment but out of respect for what Jack had built and what he had been, and that the respect was real, but it was also, as all respect in those circles is conditional on certain understandings. What understandings, Ashley said. That he stays out, Marcus said. That his life after the club is his life, and we don't reach into it, and he doesn't reach back into ours. That the separation is real. And what happened to that understanding when he called you? Called you a brief pause. He didn't call asking for anything, Marcus said. He called to inform. There's a distinction. Is there really a amount in our world? Marcus said yes, there's a significant one. A man who calls asking for help is asking the club to take action. A man who calls to inform is giving the club the choice. Jack gave us the choice. And you chose, Ashley said. We chose, Marcus said, by calling Roy Kane. by making sure Roy Kane understood the full nature of what he was dealing with. Yes. Ashley looked at her house. The television was off. Danny was asleep. The porch light was on the one she always left on when she came home after dark, a habit she'd started the night her father died and had never stopped. "What does it mean," she said carefully, "that you chose? What does it mean for tomorrow?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Roy Kane has been a problem for 8 months," he said, "not just for Jack, not just for this highway. Roy Kane has been touching things businesses roads, people that exist in spaces where our interests and civilian interests overlap. He didn't know that. He's not sophisticated enough to have known it. But the ignorance of a man who steps on a nail doesn't change the nail. So this isn't just about Jack." "It was never only about Jack," Marcus said. "Jack gave us the reason and the clarity. But the problem existed before his call, and it needed addressing regardless." Ashley absorbed this. "What's happening tomorrow?" she said. "Roy Kane is going to make a decision," Marcus said. "He's going to look at 8 men in custody and 11 business owner statements in a formal investigation, and he's going to calculate his options. And one of his options he's most likely to reach for, because men like Roy don't accept loss gracefully, is to go directly at the source." "Jack," Ashley said. "Jack," Marcus confirmed. "And that's when certain things become visible that have been invisible," Marcus said. "Roy needs to see what he's actually standing in front of before he makes a decision he can't walk back from." Ashley's hand tightened on the phone. "Oh, now how many enough?" Marcus said. "That's not a number." "No," he said. "It's not." She sat with him out. Outside, the desert night was cooling toward its brief pre-dawn reprieve, and somewhere across the dark, a coyote called once and wasn't answered. "Why are you telling me this?" Ashley said. "Jack didn't tell me. Why are you—" Marcus took a moment before answering. "Because Jack has spent 15 years not letting anyone stand next to him," he said. "He thinks it's protection. He thinks if he keeps people far enough from him, then the weight of what he was can't fall on them. And that's true up to a point. But there's a version of protection that becomes its own kind of harm, and I think Jack is close to that line with you." Ashley was very still. "He talks about you," Marcus said. "Not extensively. Jack doesn't talk about anything extensively. But when he called me, when he told me about the woman who works for him, about what Travis did about the brother," his voice changed. "And Jack's voice doesn't change. I've known this man for 30 years, and his voice does not change." A pause. "You should know what you mean to him, and you should know what tomorrow might look like, so you can decide for yourself what you want to do with that information." Ashley didn't speak for a moment. "Thank you," she said finally. "Get some sleep," Marcus said. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." He hung up. She sat in the car for another 10 minutes. She was not crying. She was doing something more internal than crying, processing, reorganizing, taking the new information and finding where it fit in the architecture of everything she already knew. She thought about Jack cleaning the combination lock every Thursday. She thought about the way he'd looked at her after Travis hit her, that controlled and very deep version of something that didn't change what it needed to do. She thought about him telling the paramedic his ribs were fine. She went inside. She checked on Danny. She went to bed. She slept 4 hours, which was more than she expected and less than she needed. And she woke up at 6:30 to Danny making cereal in the kitchen, with the focused self-sufficiency of a child who has understood for 2 years that mornings sometimes need to manage themselves. She drove him to school. She walked him to the door. Mrs. Calloway was in the hallway, and she looked at Ashley with the specific attention of a teacher who notices things, and Ashley said, "He had a good night, we're okay." And Mrs. Calloway nodded in a way that said she believed the first part and was reserving judgment on the second. Ashley drove to the Dust Devil. Jack was not there. I was at the police station giving his 8 o'clock statement, and Ashley let herself in with the key he'd given her in her 3rd week. And she made coffee, and she opened the bar for the 11 o'clock lunch service. And she served the 4 customers who came in, and she watched the parking lot, and she waited. Jack came in at 11:40. He moved slightly more carefully than usual, the cracked rib making itself known in the way cracked ribs do, by taxing every motion that involves the torso, which is to say every motion, but his face was composed and his hands were steady, and he went behind the bar and poured himself coffee without ceremony. "How did it go?" Ashley said. 11 statements filed, Jack said. Roy Kane was brought in for questioning at 9 this morning. He's been released. They didn't have enough to hold him yet, but the investigation is formal now. Federal level, the operation crossed enough state lines. Federal, Ashley said. Roy got greedy, Jack said. Reached too far. That's how men like him end. And now, Jack looked at her. He set his coffee down. Marcus called you last night, he said. It was not a question. Yes, Ashley said. I asked him not to. I know, he told me. She held his gaze. He was right to. Jack looked at her for a long moment. The morning light came through the bar windows at its particular desert angle flat and bright and merciless, and in it, she could see the butterfly closures on his hand and the shadow of bruising along his jaw that he hadn't mentioned and that the paramedics' notes probably covered. Roy Kane has nothing left to lose today, Jack said. A man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous version of that man. He's been humiliated. His operation is under federal investigation. His nephew is at a lawyer's office right now making the kind of calculations that don't end well for uncles. Roy is going to do something today. Come here, Ashley said. Yes. How many men does he still have available? Enough to want to make a point, not enough to make the point stick. And Marcus is already on his way, Jack said. Has been since early this morning. Ashley nodded. She absorbed this. She thought about 60 engines in the Arizona desert building, from a distant sound to something you could feel in your chest and the particular arithmetic of what that meant. I'm staying, she said. Ashley, I'm staying, Jack. You can tell me to go home, and I will drive to the end of the parking lot and turn around and come back. And we can do that as many times as you want, but the destination is going to be the same. So let's skip that part. He looked at her. She looked back. Fine, he said. She worked the lunch service. 3 regulars, 2 truckers, a couple who'd pulled off the highway looking for food and seemed slightly bewildered by the energy in the room, which was the energy of a place that was both a bar and something else today, something it hadn't been yesterday. At 1:32, more motorcycles pulled into the parking lot. The riders came inside, ordered food, ate without urgency. They were polite. They tipped well. They positioned themselves at the 2 tables nearest the door without making it obvious that was what they were doing. And Ashley served them and did not make it obvious that she noticed. At 2 o'clock, Jack came out from the back and stood behind the bar and looked at Ashley. He's coming, Jack said. She didn't ask how he knew. She'd stopped asking how he knew things. When an hour, maybe less, she thought about Danny at school, she thought about Mrs. Calloway and the reading homework and the stuffed dinosaur that was almost too old for her. She thought about what Marcus had said, you should know what you mean to him, and she thought about what it meant to be the kind of person who stays. Okay, she said. Your job today, Jack started. Don't, she said. Ashley, don't tell me my job is to survive, she said. I know how to survive. I've been doing it for 2 years. Tell me something useful. He looked at her, and something in his face, some final version of the wall he'd built across 15 years of chosen solitude, shifted. Stay behind the bar, he said. No matter what happens, stay behind the bar. I can do that. And if it goes wrong, it's not going to go wrong. If it goes wrong, he said, there's a phone in the office drawer, single contact saved in it. You call that number and you say Jack sent you and you say where you are. That's all you say. She held his gaze. Okay. He nodded. The hour passed in the specific way that hours pass when you are waiting for something you cannot stop and can only face. The 2 men at the tables near the door finished their food and did not leave. The parking lot held more motorcycles now than it had at noon. She hadn't heard all of them arrive. They'd appeared with the quiet efficiency of people who knew how to move without announcing themselves. At 3:15, Roy Kane's trucks came down the highway. She heard them before she saw them, the heavy diesel sound of trucks moving with purpose rather than transit. Multiple engines timed together in a way that communicated coordination. 3 trucks pulled into the parking lot. 4 more stopped on the highway shoulder. She counted from behind the bar window, 18 men getting out. 18. Roy Kane got out of the lead truck. She'd never seen him in person. He was 60 heavyset with the kind of physical authority that comes from years of being the largest force in every room he'd entered. He wore a button-down shirt and dark pants, deliberately civilian, deliberately ordinary. A man who understood the value of not looking like what he was. He stood beside his truck and surveyed the parking lot and the bar with the expression of a man conducting a property assessment. Then he looked at the motorcycles already in the lot. He stopped. He counted. Ashley watched his face from behind the bar window. She watched the moment when the arithmetic started producing results. He hadn't expected when the number of motorcycles he hadn't sent exceeded the number of men he had. Jack walked out the front door. He walked out alone without hurry in the way he crossed his own floor with complete ownership of every step, every movement, without performance or excess. He stopped in the parking lot 15 feet from Roy Kane, and he looked at him. Roy's men had spread out, 18 of them positioned with the practiced spread of people who have done this before. Roy himself was flanked by two men who were clearly personal security, larger, more alert, closer to him than the others. "Jack Mercer," Roy said. "Roy," Jack said. "I want you to understand something," Roy said. His voice carried across the parking lot with the ease of a man who was accustomed to speaking in the open air and having people listen. "This is a conversation I didn't want to have. You made it necessary." "You made it necessary," Jack said. 8 months ago when you started threatening people who weren't yours to threaten." "Business," Roy said. "Nothing personal." "It became personal," Jack said, "when your nephew put his hands on my employee." "Travis made an error in judgment," Roy said. "One I've addressed." "You addressed it by sending 11 men to my parking lot." Roy's jaw tightened slightly. "I addressed it by trying to resolve a situation that you escalated. You had an opportunity to conduct yourself like a businessman, and you chose something else." "I chose not to pay," Jack said. "There's a difference." Roy looked at him for a long moment. He looked at the bar. He looked at the motorcycles. He was calculating. Ashley could see it from where she stood behind the window. The specific quality of a man running numbers against reality and not liking what they produced. But there was something else in Roy Kane's face, something underneath the calculation, and it took her a moment to identify it because she'd seen it before in only one other person this week. He was scared. Not the same scared as Travis. Travis's fear had been the fear of a young man who'd made a wrong turn and could see the wall coming. Roy's was older and more considered, the fear of a man who has built something substantial and is watching it develop a crack he cannot locate. "Walk away," Roy said. "That's all I'm asking. Sell the bar, relocate, and we call this finished. You get to keep your health. I get to keep my operation." "Everyone." "No," Jack said. Roy blinked. "I'm giving you an out." "I don't want your out," Jack said. "I want you to understand something. I walked away from a life 20 years ago because I was tired of men like you existing in the same world as people who just want to run their businesses and raise their families without being afraid. I have spent 15 years in this desert being quiet, being small, asking nothing of anyone, and giving as little cause for notice as I could manage." He paused. "And then you sent your nephew into my bar." Roy's expression hardened. "You don't have the backing to." The sound came from the highway. It started as a frequency, more than a sound, a vibration that Ashley felt in the soles of her feet through the bar floor before she heard it with her ears. Low, rhythmic, building from the north and the south simultaneously from both directions at once, the way a tide builds. Roy heard it. His two bodyguards heard it. The 18 men deployed across the parking lot heard it. Every head turned toward the highway. The first riders came into view from the north, a column of motorcycles moving at a steady, unhurried pace. The kind of pace that has nowhere to be except exactly where it is. Behind them more. And from the south, the same column appearing from the heat shimmer of the highway, with the measured certainty of something that had decided long before this moment where it was going. They filled the highway. They turned into the parking lot in a single unhurried file, and the sound of 60 engines in a desert afternoon is a sound that belongs to a different register than ordinary sound. It is physical. It moves through the body. It is felt in the jaw, in the chest, in the back of the skull. It is not threatening exactly. It is simply massive. It is the sound of something that has decided to be present. 63 riders, Ashley counted later. From Nevada, from California, from New Mexico, from Utah, the western territories of a brotherhood that had existed for 70 years and had a memory to match. They parked. They killed their engines. The silence that followed 63 engines shutting off simultaneously was one of the loudest things Ashley had ever heard. Roy Kane stood in his parking lot and looked at what had arrived, and Ashley watched his face complete its journey from calculation to understanding, and understanding, for Roy Kane looked like a man standing in a room that is smaller than he thought it was and getting smaller. Marcus Callahan dismounted last. I was not what Ashley had expected, and she couldn't have said exactly what she had expected, something more theatrical. Perhaps something that wore its authority more visibly. He was 52 years old, broad through the shoulders, with a face that had been weathered by the same desert decades that had weathered Jack's, and he wore his coat with the ease of something that had long ago stopped being a garment and had become simply part of his exterior. He removed his helmet. He handed it to the man beside him. He walked through the parking lot toward Jack with the same unhurried stride that Jack had walked out of the bar with, and there was something in the two of them moving toward each other across that parking lot that Ashley felt in her throat. Marcus stopped in front of Jack. He looked at him. Jack looked at him. 15 years collapsed in the space of a handshake that became something more. Marcus's hand gripping Jack's arm at the elbow. Jack's doing the same, the specific greeting of men who do not hug, but who have stood in enough serious places together that their hands know how to say what their voices won't. You look like hell, Marcus said. Cracked rib, Jack said. I heard. Marcus looked at the butterfly closures on Jack's hand. He looked at the parking lot full of Roy Kane's men who had stopped being a threat the moment the highway had filled with engines. You couldn't have called me before you took on 11 people yourself. 8, Jack said. Right, 8. Marcus turned to look at Roy Kane. Roy was still standing by his truck. His bodyguards were still flanking him. His 18 men were still deployed across the parking lot, which was now also full of 63 men who had not been invited and were not going to leave until they decided to. Marcus walked to Roy Kane. He did not walk fast. He did not walk with any visible aggression. He walked the way a man walks when he is entirely certain of the outcome and has no particular need to hurry. He stopped in front of Roy. He looked at him. You know who I am, Marcus said. Roy's jaw worked once. Yes. Then I'm only going to say this once, Marcus said. Whatever you're calculating right now, leave it. The calculation is finished. It was finished before you drove out here. The federal investigation isn't going away, and your men in custody aren't getting quiet, and the 11 people who finally found the courage to file statements aren't going to unfile them. He paused. And whatever version of this ends with you winning whatever you're imagining in the part of your head that hasn't caught up yet, that version doesn't exist. It didn't exist before today, and it absolutely doesn't exist now. Roy looked at the 63 riders in his parking lot. He looked at Jack. He looked at Ashley, who was watching through the bar window and who did not look away. Something went out of Roy Kane in that moment. Not suddenly, it wasn't a collapse. It was more like a gradual and irreversible deflation, the settling of a structure that has lost its load-bearing element. He was still standing. He was still Roy Kane. But some essential architecture had given way. What do you want? Roy said. From you, Marcus said. Nothing. Everything you owe goes to the people you spent 8 months terrorizing. That's a conversation between you and a federal judge. He glanced at the men Roy had brought. Tell your people to go home. A long pause. Go home, Roy said. His men looked at each other, then at the 63 riders around them. Then one by one they got into the trucks and the cars and they went. Roy stood by his truck alone. Am I free to go? He said. His voice had changed. It was quieter now, smaller in the specific way that voices get smaller when the structure that was holding them up has come down. Talk to your lawyer, Marcus said. Go do that right now. And Roy, be smart about what comes next. Smart is your best option. Roy got in his truck. He drove away. Marcus watched him go. Then he turned back to Jack. He'll be arrested before dinner, Marcus said. The federal agents have been waiting for the assault evidence from last night. That and the 11 statements are enough. He knows it. I know, Jack said. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Something passed between them, the specific wordless communication of men who have known each other long enough that certain things don't require language. You should have called sooner, Marcus said. I know, Jack said again. You've been out here 15 years by yourself being Marcus. I'm saying it once. You've said it. Marcus looked at him. Then he almost smiled, not quite, but in the neighborhood. Come on, buy me a beer. Jack looked at him. You drove 6 hours. Rode, Marcus corrected. And yes, they went inside. Ashley was behind the bar. She had not moved from behind the bar as instructed. She had, however, watched everything through the window, with the concentrated attention of a woman filing every detail for the permanent record. Marcus came in and sat down at the bar. 63 riders followed him in ones and twos, filling the dust devil with a noise and a physical presence. It had perhaps never held in its history the old wooden floors singing underfoot in 20 places at once, the mounted license plates trembling slightly on the walls. Ashley poured beers. She poured them quickly and efficiently and without commentary because commentary was not what this moment required. What this moment required was cold beer delivered to 63 people who had ridden however many hours through the Arizona heat to be here. And she was good at her job, and she was going to do it. Marcus watched her work. After a few minutes, he said, "You're Ashley." "I am," she said. She set a beer in front of him. "Jack talks about you," Marcus said. "He mentioned," Ashley said. Marcus looked at her with an assessment she didn't flinch from. He said, "You don't scare easy." "I scare fine," Ashley said. "I just don't let it drive." Marcus picked up the beer. He looked at Jack, who was standing at the end of the bar doing the same thing he was always doing, present, quiet, entirely himself. "She'll do," Marcus said to no one in particular. Jack from the end of the bar, she was never in question. Ashley set another beer on the counter and moved down the bar and did not comment on either of them, which was its own form of commentary, and which made the man sitting 2 stools down from Marcus, a rider from Nevada with a gray beard and a sun-damaged face, laugh in the sudden and unguarded way that people laugh when something is true. Roy Kane was arrested at 5:47 that evening at his house in Silver Creek by federal agents who had been building their case for 2 hours and needed only the assault from the previous night to make it complete. Travis Kane turned himself in at 6:15 on the advice of a lawyer who had clearly communicated to him that cooperation was the only card he had left to play. Denny Pruitt and Carl Voss had already been in custody since the previous night. Ashley found out about the arrest from a text from the Silver Creek deputy who'd taken her statement 3 days earlier, a single line that read "Kane in custody." Both of them. Thought you'd want to know. She was standing in the Dust Devil kitchen when she got it. She read it twice. She set the phone face down on the counter and stood for a moment with her hands flat on the surface. And she did something then that she had not done since the night Roy Kane had called her on the highway, and she'd pulled over and shaken for 30 seconds and then stopped. She let herself feel the full weight of the relief. Not the managed version, not the practical version that immediately inventories what comes next. The real version, the version that knows something dangerous and terrible has been removed from the path of the people you love and allows itself for just a moment to understand what that means. She stood in the kitchen of the Dust Devil Roadhouse and breathed. Then she went back out and served the rest of the evening. The 63 riders stayed through the night. They slept in the parking lot in tents and sleeping bags and across the seats of their bikes. And when Ashley left at midnight, the parking lot was full of low fire and conversation and the particular settled energy of people who have done what they came to do and have nowhere to be until morning. Jack walked her to her car. They stood in the parking lot with the sound of conversation around them and the desert stars overhead and the highway quiet at last. "It's over," Ashley said. "The acute part," Jack said. "The rest takes time. Your ribs are going to take time too." "My ribs are, if you say fine, I'm going to be very tired of you," she said. He looked at her. Something in his face was different tonight. Not open exactly because Jack Mercer had not spent 15 years building a careful internal life, only to dismantle it in one evening. But lighter, like something that had been load-bearing had been set down and he was still adjusting to the unfamiliar sensation of standing without the weight. "Thank you," he said, "for staying." "Thank you," she said, "for not making me leave." He looked at the bar, at the sign buzzing overhead, at the parking lot full of riders who had come from 6 states because a man who had spent 15 years being small had finally in one specific moment stopped being able to. "Marcus said something to me earlier," Jack said, "when we were inside." "What?" he said. Jack paused, looked at his hands, the butterfly closures. "He said that the bravest thing he ever saw me do wasn't anything from when I was writing. He said it was calling him. He said most men in my position, most men who'd spent that long being alone, would have figured out how to handle Roy Kane by themselves in the dark without letting anyone know they needed the help. He said calling him was the first time in 15 years he'd heard me ask for something." Ashley was quiet. "Was he right?" she said. Jack thought about it for a moment with the seriousness he brought to honest questions. "Yeah," he said. She looked at him. "You should do it more often," she said. The stars overhead were the extravagant Arizona kind, the kind that have nothing competing with them for 100 miles in any direction, and they did what they always did. They burned steady and indifferent and vast over the highway and the desert and the old bar, with its buzzing sign and the parking lot full of riders who had come because a name still meant something, because certain things have weight that doesn't diminish with distance or with time. Ashley got in her car. She drove home. She picked up Danny's dinosaur from the floor where it had fallen off his bed and set it back beside him without waking him. And she stood in his doorway in the dark and felt not safe because the world was the world. And safety was never a permanent condition, but something close to it. Something that had a foundation. Something that held. She went to bed. She slept. The riders left at dawn. Ashley didn't see them go. She was home asleep for the first time in a week, sleeping the kind of sleep that has no surface, no listening, no part of itself, held back in case something happens. But Jack told her later that they left the way they'd arrived without ceremony, filing out of the parking lot in the gray early light, one by one until the highway swallowed them, and the sound of their engines faded into the desert quiet like something returning to where it came from. Marcus was last. He and Jack stood in the empty parking lot at 5:40 in the morning and said the things that 30 years of history compressed into 10 minutes, when both men are the kind of men who don't waste words. Jack told her some of, not all. What he told her was this: Marcus had said the door was open. Not to the club, not to the life. That door had been closed and locked and the key thrown away, and both of them understood it would stay that way. But to the brotherhood itself, the thing underneath the organization, the thing that had existed before the patches and the hierarchy and would exist after that door, Marcus said, was never closed, had never been closed, had been waiting for 15 years on the other side of Jack's silence. Jack had not known what to say to that. Marcus had clapped him once on the shoulder, put on his helmet, and ridden north. Jack stood in the empty parking lot for a while after. Then he went inside and made coffee and opened the bar. The first week after Roy Cain's arrest was strange in the specific way that weeks are strange when the threat that has been organizing your daily existence suddenly removes itself and you are left with the ordinary shape of your life and have to remember how to inhabit it without the structure that fear provides. Ashley noticed it in herself before she could name it, a low restlessness, a hypervigilance that had nowhere to direct itself, ears that kept tracking sounds on the highway with a precision that was no longer necessary. She gave herself a week. She figured that was fair. The business owners on the highway called one by one over the first 3 days. She took most of the calls because Jack's phone habits had not improved with the resolution of the crisis. He answered when he needed to and let everything else ring through. Earl Henderson called on Monday morning, and his voice when Ashley picked up carried the particular weight of a man delivering an apology he has been rehearsing. "I need you to tell Jack something," Earl said. "You could tell him yourself," Ashley said. "He's right here." A pause. "I know, I'd rather tell you first and then him." "Okay." "I'm ashamed," Earl said. "That's the thing I need to say. I stopped coming in because I was scared, and I left you two alone in it, and I've been sitting with that for a week, and I can't sit with it anymore. I'm ashamed." Ashley stood behind the bar with the phone and looked at Jack, who was wiping down the counter and clearly not listening, which was his version of giving her privacy in a room with no walls. "Earl," she said, "you have been coming into this bar every Thursday for longer than I've been alive. You left your tip the last night you came in, and you called to say you were sorry. That's not nothing. It's not enough." "No," she said, "it's not, but it's a start. Come in Thursday." He came in Thursday. He brought his wife and 2 friends, and Ashley served them at the corner table and refilled the water glasses without being asked, and felt something settle in the room that had been unsettled for 2 months. Other regulars came back that week. Not all at once, people trickle back the way they trickle away, cautiously testing the temperature before committing, but steadily. By Friday, the parking lot was fuller than it had been in 6 weeks, and the pool table had a 2-game wait list, and Ashley was on her 4th trip to the kitchen for bar nuts. She didn't have time to think about it in the moment. She thought about it later, driving home, and what she thought was, this is what it looks like when a place earns back what it was. The federal investigation moved faster than she expected. Roy Cain's lawyer was good expensive, precise the kind who makes investigators earn every single count. But 11 corroborating statements from business owners across 3 counties, combined with the assault charges from the parking lot incident, combined with the financial records that federal agents pulled from Roy's three front businesses, combined with the testimony of two of his own men who understood the difference between loyalty and going to prison for someone who wouldn't do the same for them, the case was substantial enough that Roy's lawyer's primary functions shifted within 3 weeks from defense to damage control. Travis Kane pleaded guilty to assault and extortion charges in the 4th week. His lawyer had negotiated cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence, and Travis had sat in a room and told federal investigators everything he knew about Roy's operation in the specific tone of a man who has decided that the version of himself that existed 6 weeks ago was someone else's problem now. Ashley heard this from the deputy who texted her the night of the arrests. His name was Carrasco, and he had developed the habit of keeping her informally updated, which she appreciated with the specific gratitude of someone who has learned that information is its own form of safety. "How much time is Travis looking at?" she asked. 3 to 5 with cooperation, Carrasco said. "Roy is looking at considerably more. The federal charges stack. And the men who were in the parking lot, most pled out. A few are fighting it. It doesn't matter much. The conspiracy charges attach whether they plea or not." Ashley nodded. She was sitting in the office at the Dust Devil, her office now, in the sense that she spent as much time in it as Jack did and had started keeping her own files in the second drawer of the filing cabinet. She looked at the steel locker in the corner. It was still there. Still locked. The combination lock still clean. "Thank you, Deputy," she said. "Carlos," he said. "We've been through enough together. Carlos is fine." She almost smiled at that. "Thank you, Carlos." Roy Kane was indicted on federal extortion and conspiracy charges in week 5. The indictment ran at 23 counts and named 11 victims by name and addressed 3 separate states. It was the kind of indictment that ends careers and closes chapters and establishes in the permanent record of public documents exactly what a man was. Ashley read every page. She didn't do it out of vindictiveness. She did it because she had been named in it. The incident at the Dust Devil Roadhouse was count 7. The assault on an employee of an establishment that had refused to pay and seeing her own name in a federal document as a named victim was strange. In a way, she had not anticipated a kind of external confirmation of something she had already processed internally, but that took on different weight in official language. She set the document down. She looked out the office window at the bar at the lunch service, running at the 3 tables occupied at Jack behind the counter, doing what Jack did. She thought about Danny, who had started sleeping with his bedroom door open again, which was how she knew he was less afraid than he'd been. He slept with the door open when things were okay. He slept with it closed when he was listening for something. She went back out to work. The conversation she'd been waiting for happened on a Tuesday, 6 weeks after the arrests, on a slow afternoon when the bar held only 2 customers, and Jack came out from the back and sat on the stool across the counter from her, which was not something he did. Jack did not sit on the customer side of his own bar, and she looked at him and understood that something had been decided. "I want to talk to you about the bar," he said. Ashley set down the glass she was drying. "Okay." "I'm not going anywhere," he said immediately. "I want to be clear about that first. I'm not selling, I'm not closing, I'm not retiring." He paused. "But I've been running this place alone for 11 years, and the last 2 months showed me something I should have understood before." "What?" "That alone is a choice," he said, "not a requirement. And I've been making it out of habit longer than I've been making it out of sense." Ashley looked at him. "I want you to management," he said. "Formally, title, salary increase, authority over staffing and operations. I'll still be here. I'll be here every day. But the running of it should be yours. You're better at the people side than I am. You always have been." And he paused. Something moved through his face that was not comfortable for him, but that he had clearly decided was necessary. "And I'd like you to stay, not just for the work. I'd like you to stay because this place is better with you in it, and I've known that since your 3rd week, and I should have said it sooner." Ashley stood on her side of the bar and let his words arrive fully before she answered. She thought about the Thursday 6 weeks ago, when she'd sat across this same bar and told him they wouldn't pay, that there was a difference between surviving and being whole. She thought about Danny asking if Mr. Mercer was okay and saying he had that kind of face. She thought about 17 miles of desert highway and a phone call from Marcus Callahan, and at 2 in the morning, and 63 engines filling the air, was something that could be felt in the jaw and the chest. She thought about Carol, about a diner outside Reno, about what it cost a man to let someone close enough to matter after something like that, and what it meant that he was doing it anyway. Yes, she said. Yes, to which part? All of it, she said. Jack looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once in the way that Jack Mercer confirmed things without elaboration, without performance, as a simple acknowledgement that something real had been decided and didn't require more words than it had already received. He got up and went back behind the bar. Ashley picked up the glass she'd been drying and finished drying it and put it away. That was how it was done. The week after that conversation, 3 things happened that together constituted what Ashley would later think of as the bar finding its new shape. The first was Earl Henderson, who came in on Thursday, as he had promised, and stayed for 2 hours, and on his way out stopped at the bar and said to Jack without preamble, "I'm sorry I stopped coming in." And Jack had said with the same directness, "I know. Come back next Thursday." And Earl had said he would, and he did. The second was Mrs. Calloway, Danny's teacher, who came in on a Saturday with her husband for dinner, which she'd clearly been wanting to do for a while because she'd asked Ashley twice if the Dust Devil was worth the drive. Ashley served them herself, and Mrs. Calloway said at one point quietly, "Danny told me things got scary for a while." And Ashley said they did. And Mrs. Calloway said, "He told me his sister handled it." She let that sit for a moment. "I think he's very lucky." Ashley said, "I think we both are." The third thing was a letter. It arrived on a Wednesday in a plain envelope with a Nevada postmark and no return address. And Ashley found it on the bar when she came in for the morning prep, which meant Jack had seen it and left it for her, which meant he knew what it was. She opened it. It was 2 paragraphs handwritten on plain paper in the economical script of a man who was precise about everything, including penmanship. "Ashley," it read, "Jack told me you asked how many riders were coming, and I told him enough. I want to tell you the actual number because you're the kind of person who deserves actual answers. 63. From 6 states. Every one of them came because Jack Mercer asked, and Jack Mercer asking is something that has not happened in 15 years. And when it did not, one person who received that call thought about whether to come. They thought about how fast they could get there. That should tell you something about who he is. I suspect you already know. But it should be said out loud by someone who has known him long enough to say it with the full weight of the evidence. Take care of him. He won't ask you to. That's why I'm asking you to, MC." Ashley read it twice. She folded it and put it in her back pocket and carried it there for the rest of the day. And at the end of the shift, she put it in the second drawer of the filing cabinet behind her own files where it would stay. She did not show it to Jack. Some things are said to the right person even when they're about someone else. 2 months after the arrest, Danny came to the bar for the first time. It was a Sunday, the bar's closed day, and Ashley had brought him because she needed to do inventory and couldn't find a sitter. And Danny had been asking about the Dust Devil since the first week she'd worked there, with the focused curiosity he brought to everything that mattered to the people he loved. He walked in and looked around with serious eyes, taking inventory in his own way. The pool table, the license plates, the mounted antlers, the photographs on the wall. Jack was in the back when they arrived. He came out and stopped when he saw Danny, and Danny stopped when he saw Jack, and they looked at each other with the particular mutual assessment of 2 people who have heard about each other from someone they both trust. "You're Mr. Mercer," Danny said. "I am," Jack said. "You're Danny." "Ashley talks about you," Danny said. "Does she?" "She says you make the best brisket in Arizona." West of Texas, Ashley corrected from behind the bar, where she was already pulling out the inventory clipboard. Jack looked at Danny for a moment. "You want to see the kitchen?" Danny's face went through 3 emotions in 1 second. Yes, they disappeared into the back. Ashley stood behind the bar with her clipboard and listened to the sound of Jack explaining the kitchen to an 8-year-old who asked questions with the rapid-fire density of someone who finds everything genuinely interesting, and Jack answering each one with the same unhurried completeness he brought to everything, and she felt something move through her chest that she had no adequate word for and didn't try to name. She did her inventory. They were in the kitchen for 40 minutes. When they came back out, Danny was carrying a small plate with a piece of brisket on it. A test piece, Jack said, from the batch he was starting for tomorrow. And Danny was eating it with the focused appreciation of a person receiving information through their taste buds. And when he finished, he looked at Jack and said, "Ashley's right. This is the best thing I've ever eaten." Jack said, "Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation for modesty." Danny looked at him with complete seriousness. "I thought your reputation was for being scary." Jack blinked. Ashley from behind the bar turned to face the wall. "Where did you hear that?" Jack said. "From the truckers," Danny said. "They come into the parking lot sometimes when Ashley picks me up and they say Mr. Mercer is someone you don't want to cross. Is that true?" Jack looked at him. "It used to be truer than it is," Jack said. Danny considered this with great seriousness. "Ashley says the best people are the ones who could be scary but choose not to be." A pause. "She's right," Jack said. "She usually is," Danny said, and went back to his brisket. The federal trial for Roy Kane began 11 weeks after his indictment. Ashley testified on the third day. She drove herself to the courthouse in Tucson, parked, walked in, and sat in the witness box and answered the prosecutor's questions with the same flat precision she brought to everything that required her not to flinch. And when the defense attorney tried the particular tactic of making the Dust Devil Roadhouse sound like a place that invited trouble, she looked at him calmly and said, "My employer refused to pay for protection he was being extorted into paying for. That's not inviting trouble. That's having a spine." The defense attorney did not ask her a follow-up question. Jack testified on the fourth day. Ashley sat in the gallery and watched him take the witness box and answer questions with the same economy he brought to everything. And she watched the jury watch him, watch the specific quality of attention that he commanded without seeking it, the way a room settles when a certain kind of person speaks and she thought they're going to believe him. Not because he's performing credibility, because he doesn't know how to perform anything. She was right. Roy Kane was convicted on 19 of 23 counts. The verdict came in on a Friday afternoon and Carrasco texted her before the news did guilty. 19 counts. Sentencing in 8 weeks. Ashley was behind the bar when the text came in. She read it. She set her phone down. She looked at Jack, who was at the other end of the bar and who was looking at her with the particular attention that meant he already knew that someone had reached him too. She said nothing. He said nothing. After a moment, she picked up a glass and began to dry it, and he picked up a rag and began wiping the counter. And the Dust Devil Roadhouse continued doing what it had always done, being open, being itself, serving the people who came through its door with whatever they needed and asking nothing of them except that they be decent about it. Roy Kane was sentenced to 16 years. Travis Kane was sentenced to 4 with eligibility for parole in 2.5 pending continued cooperation. The extortion network, 8 months of systematic terror across one stretch of Arizona highway, was formally dismantled in a federal filing that ran to 60 pages, in which Ashley read the summary of and then set aside because some things need to be understood and then put down. What she didn't put down was the bar. She hired a second full-time server, a woman named Petra, who had moved to Silver Creek from Flagstaff with her teenage daughter, and who had the specific quality of competence that comes from having had to be competent for a long time without anyone asking if it was hard. She hired a weekend cook who handled the kitchen so that Jack could be in the bar more, which was where he functioned best and where Ashley had long since understood he was happiest in the specific, understated way that Jack Mercer was happy. Not loudly, not dramatically, but fully, the way a man is happy when he is exactly where he has chosen to be. The bar's Friday nights came back. Slowly then, all at once, the way things return when the thing that drove them away has been definitively removed. The corner table filled every Thursday with Earl Henderson and rotating guests. The pool table leaned its habitual leftward lean, and everyone compensated without being told. The television above the bar ran baseball with the sound low in football when the season turned. Marcus Callahan came through on a Tuesday in October alone, no announcement. He sat at the bar and ordered coffee and ate a bowl of chili and talked to Jack for 2 hours about things Ashley couldn't hear from the other end of the bar and didn't try to. When he left, he stopped in front of her and looked at her with the direct assessment she'd learned was simply how he looked at everyone. "How is he?" Marcus said. Ashley considered the question honestly. "Better than he was. Not finished getting there." Marcus nodded. "That's about right." "How long does it take?" she said. 15 years of choosing alone. How long does it take to undo that?" Marcus looked at her. "You asking for a timeline or asking if it's possible?" "Asking if it's possible." "Yes," Marcus said. "It's possible." He picked up his helmet. "You're most of why." He walked out. Ashley watched his bike pull out of the parking lot and onto the highway, growing smaller against the flat October sky until it was a point and then nothing. She went back to work. The thing about the dust devil that Ashley understood by November, in a way she hadn't when she'd first taken the job out of practical necessity, the thing she understood now from the inside, from the manager's side of the counter, from the side that knew the inventory and the payroll, and the particular personality of every regular, was that the bar had survived, not because Jack was capable of violence. Plenty of men were capable of violence. Roy Kane's men had been capable of violence. Violence itself was not the resource. The resource was something harder to name and harder to deplete, the specific, unperformable quality of a man who has decided what he will and will not allow in his world, and who holds that line not out of aggression, but out of something quieter and more durable. Conviction, maybe, or something so close to it that the difference didn't matter. One evening in November after closing, Ashley found Jack in the back hallway standing in front of the steel locker. She had found him there before that night, 6 weeks into the crisis, when she'd backed away on the singing board and said nothing. This time she didn't back away. She walked up beside him and stood there. He didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. After a moment, he reached out and touched the combination lock, the way she'd seen him do before, not turning it, not opening it, just the contact, the confirmation of something. "You're not going to open it," she said. "No," he said, "but you keep it." "Yes?" She thought about that. "Because it's what you were." "Because it's what I was," he said, "and because pretending it isn't is a kind of lie I don't want to live with." She stood with him for a moment longer. "Carol would have liked this place," she said. She didn't know why she said it. It arrived fully formed and she let it out. Jack was quiet for a long moment. "She would have rearranged the kitchen," he said, "and she would have been right to." "Probably." "She would have liked you," he said. Ashley felt that land. She let it. "Come on," she said. "I'll buy you a coffee before I head home." "You work for me," he said. "You can't buy me coffee in my own bar." "Then you buy me coffee and I'll accept it graciously." He turned away from the locker. He walked with her back into the bar, the empty after-hours bar, with its wooden floor and its leftward-leaning pool table and its buzzing sign and its photographs of the highway in every decade going back to the 50s. And he made coffee, and they sat at the counter and drank it, and outside the Arizona November dark pressed against the windows with its cold desert indifference, and the highway ran on in both directions toward everything the world held. Danny turned 9 in December. Ashley threw him a party in the Dust Devil. On a Sunday afternoon, tables pushed together in the center, 8 kids from his class running between the pool table and the jukebox with the focused chaos of 9-year-olds who have been given space and sugar and permission. Mrs. Calloway came. Earl Henderson came with his wife and brought a pie. Petra brought her daughter. Carlos Carrasco came off duty in civilian clothes and was immediately recruited by Danny to explain how police radios worked. Jack made brisket. He made enough for 30 people, and there were 21, and somehow it was still exactly enough, which was the specific magic of cooking by a man who has been reading rooms his whole life and knows how to calibrate without measuring. At one point during the party, Ashley looked up from a conversation with Petra and found Danny standing next to Jack near the kitchen door. Jack was crouching to Danny's level, which, given his cracked rib now fully healed, still had a careful quality to it, and they were looking at something Danny held in his hands. A dinosaur figurine, one he'd brought from home, the kind with the accordion neck. Danny was explaining something with great seriousness, and Jack was listening with his full attention. The way he listened to everything and the image of the two of them, the 8-year-old and the 65-year-old, in the doorway of the kitchen of the Dust Devil Roadhouse, landed in Ashley's chest with a weight she didn't try to analyze. She just looked at it for a moment. Then she went back to her conversation. In January, Ashley drove past the highway stretch that had been Roy Kane's operation. She drove it deliberately with time to spare on a Saturday morning when she didn't need to be anywhere particular. She drove past Mel's Auto, which had repaired and repainted its facade, past the Sunrise Diner, which had new windows and a new sign, past 5 other businesses she recognized from the federal indictment, all of them open, all of them running, all of them simply existing in the ordinary way that businesses exist when they are no longer afraid. She thought about what had turned the 8 months of fear and compliance, the broken windows and destroyed motorcycles and threatening letters, and the steady erosion of dignity that happens to people who are forced to pay for the right to exist in their own space. She thought about Roy Kane and the 16 years he would spend understanding what his choices had cost him and the people around him. She thought about Jack, who had said no from the beginning. Not because he wasn't afraid. She knew better than to believe he was never afraid, but because he had made the calculation that the cost of saying yes was higher than any cost that saying no could produce. Because he had buried Carol and come back and made that promise in the particular irreversible way that grief forces you to make promises. She thought about herself. She thought about the 24-year-old who had walked into the Dust Devil 6 months ago with a rubber band holding her hair back and a swollen anxiety about whether $11 an hour plus tips would be enough to keep an 8-year-old in the school where Mrs. Calloway had taken an interest in him. She thought about who she was now, the same person, the same woman with the same history and the same brother and the same practical streak and the same habit of pressing the back of her hand against her lip when she needed to take inventory of what was damaged. But also, and this was the part that was harder to name, more herself, as though the 6 months had been a process, not of becoming something new, but of confirming what was already there, of putting the questions she'd been carrying since her parents died. Am I enough? Can I hold? Will it be sufficient to a practical test in finding in the results an answer she could live with? She pulled back onto the highway. She drove to the Dust Devil. Jack was behind the bar when she walked in, wiping down the counter completely. Himself completely present, doing what he did with the same unhurried conviction he had always brought to it. He looked up when she came in. "You're early," he said. "I know," she said. She sat down at the counter. "I drove the highway." He looked at her. "And everyone's open," she said. He nodded. "I know." She looked at him across the bar. She thought about Carol, about the locker, about 63 engines arriving from 6 states because a name still meant something, and a man who had spent 15 years being quiet had finally once chosen not to be. She thought about Marcus saying, "You're most of why," and about Danny saying the best people are the ones who could be scary but choose not to be, and about Jack crouching in the kitchen doorway, listening to an explanation of a dinosaur with his complete and unhurried attention. "Jack," she said. "Ashley, we're going to be okay," she said. He looked at her for a moment, not the way he looked at problems, not the way he looked at threats, not the way he looked at the highway when he was measuring distance and intention, the way he looked at things that were simply true. "Yeah," he said, "we are." Outside the Dust Devil Roadhouse, the January highway ran on in both directions through the flat Arizona morning, cold and clear and empty, and full of everything that was coming, the trucks and the ranchers and the bikers just passing through, the families pulling off for lunch, the regulars who came back every week because a place had earned their return. The neon sign buzzed overhead with its habitual flicker, indifferent to the cold, indifferent to everything. Burning the same red and blue it had been burning since before either of them was born. The desert stretched in every direction, ancient and patient, holding its silence the way it always had, not as emptiness but as space, as the particular vast and generous space in which small true things could finally be heard. And inside the Dust Devil, a 65-year-old man who had once been the most feared chapter president in the Western Territories stood behind his bar and wiped down the counter, and was in the specific, endurable way that men like him are content wholly quietly without performance or remainder exactly where he had chosen to be. And a 24-year-old woman who had raised her brother on $11 an hour and refused to look away from a hard thing on the worst night of her working life sat on the other side of the counter and drank her morning coffee and managed the bar that was now also hers, and understood with the full and settled weight of earned certainty that what real strength looks like is not the absence of fear. It is the decision made once and then kept to protect the people who deserve protection, and to keep making that decision every single day for as long as it takes, no matter what walks through the door. That was what Jack Mercer had taught her, and it was what she intended to spend the rest of her life proving she had learned. "You think I'm just some grease monkey? Go ahead, keep laughing." And Walker said it quietly, so quietly that Cameron Blake's men almost missed it. Something in his voice made one of them stop mid-swing. The chrome had already been crushed, the leather already slashed. Ethan opened his hand, and what was sitting in his palm made a retired biker across the street go completely pale. New here, subscribe to our channel and follow this story all the way to the end. Your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Started like every other morning in Millhaven, Montana. There, rolling down from the mountains, the smell of pine and diesel mixing together the way it always did in October. It's working the telephone lines. A dog barking somewhere 2 blocks over. Ethan Walker, already up at 5:30, already at the shop, already crouched beside a 1974 Harley-Davidson Sportster that someone had ridden half to death and then abandoned on the side of Highway 12 like a piece of trash. He found it 3 weeks ago. Couldn't leave it there. Could leave a broken thing lying on the side of the road. Been able to. It was the same reason his shop had become what it had become, not a business so much as a place where broken things came to get put back together. Cycles, people, sometimes both at the same time. Ethan set his coffee cup on the floor beside him, reached into the engine with both hands, and started working. He didn't turn on music. He didn't need it. The sounds of the shop were music enough. The click of metal on metal, the hiss of air through a gap that shouldn't have been there, rhythm of a man who had been doing this long enough that his hands remembered every step before his mind did. 20 years he had been in Millhaven. 20 years of 6 a.m. mornings in oil-stained jeans and the particular kind of satisfaction that came from taking something ruined and making it run again. His name was known in this town the way quiet names always get known, not because he chased attention, but because people kept showing up. Your mother, whose only transportation was a 2003 Honda Shadow that had started making a grinding sound. And Neil, a 19 kid who had inherited his grandfather's Road King and didn't know the first thing about what was wrong with it. A veteran who came in every March to have his Indian chief tuned up and stayed for 3 hours because there was nobody at home to talk to anymore. And charged what he needed to, sometimes less, sometimes nothing at all. Made a big deal out of it. That was the thing about Ethan Walker that most people in Millhaven had figured out over 2 decades. He simply did not make a big deal out of things. Not when he fixed a bike for free. Not when he helped someone load furniture into a truck at 11 at night. When he quietly paid the heating bill for the Nguyen family. 3 winters ago when their furnace died in December and they didn't tell anyone because they were too proud to ask. Again, he just did things, then went back to work. At 56 years old, he was tall, lean, with hands that told you everything, knuckles, thick from years of wrenching, a scar across his left palm, from a moment he didn't talk about, the kind of grip that made younger men quietly recalibrate when they shook it. Had gone mostly gray at the temples. His blue eyes had a steadiness to them that some people found calming and others found slightly unnerving, though they could never explain exactly why. He wore the same kind of thing every day: work pants, a plain long-sleeve shirt, steel-toed boots, no rings, watch, a leather jacket he kept on a hook by the door that he put on when the temperature dropped below 30 and took off when it rose above 40. Quiet life, small town. That was the story of Ethan Walker, as far as Millhaven was concerned. It's not the whole story, but that part would come later. The shop was called Walker's No Last Name. Description, then. Just Walker's, in hand-painted letters above the garage door that had been faded by Montana sun for longer than anyone could remember. It sat on the corner of 3rd and Calder, in the old industrial district on the south end of town, by a tire shop, a welding supply company diner that had been serving the same 4 breakfast specials since 1987, below of buildings that had once housed a lumber mill operation and now housed mostly dust and memory. It was in a pretty part of town, but it was a working part of town. Had always preferred working things to pretty things. His shop had 2 bays. A small waiting area with 4 chairs and a coffee maker that was never turned off. Back room, where he kept parts organized in a system that made sense only to him and worked perfectly because of it. Corner near the west wall, where his own Harley sat when it wasn't on the road. Harley. That one. A 1968 Harley-Davidson Electroglide, one, black with silver trim, restored over 5 years with parts he had sourced from 17 different states. It had taken him nearly 4,000 hours of work, spread across those 5 years, on it in the evenings, after the shop closed, one, sometimes past midnight, sometimes with a glass of bourbon beside him, and nothing but the work and the silence. It's not the most valuable motorcycle in Montana. It was the most important one in Ethan's world, because of what it was worth, because of what it meant, because it had been his wife's idea, Carol, who had died 8 years ago from a cancer that moved faster than anyone expected. Had seen him one evening staring at the bare frame he had pulled from a salvage yard and said, "Fix it. Beautiful. Make it so that when you ride it, you can't think about anything else." Done exactly that. The Harley sat in that corner of the shop like something between a memorial and a promise. He took it out 2 or 3 times a month, Elise. Always alone, Elise. Early morning, ways, heading north toward the mountains where the road emptied out, and it was just him and the machine and whatever Carol might be watching from wherever she was. Talked about it. He didn't need to. Jimmy Reyes knocked on the open bay door at 7:45 that Tuesday morning, holding a cardboard tray with 2 coffees. 23. A local kid who had started coming around the shop 4 years ago to ask questions and had never really left. 2 days a week as Ethan's only employee, learning slowly, way. Ethan looked up from the Sportster. "You're late." "Ethan, exactly on time," Jimmy said. "You're just always early." Called showing up, Jimmy. "That's called being old," Jimmy said, and set a coffee beside Ethan on the floor. Sportster. Cracked head gasket. Previous owner ran it hot and never pulled over. Ethan picked up the coffee, drank some, run it hot, and never pull over. "People think machines are like them," Jimmy said. "They think if you just push through it, everything will be fine." Ethan looked at him. "That's surprisingly philosophical for 7:45. Listening to podcasts." "Good Lord." Jimmy laughed. He started pulling his coveralls from the hook, and Ethan went back to the Sportster. In the morning continued the way. Mornings in the shop always continued steadily, quietly, punctuated by the specific sounds of mechanical problem solving and the occasional exchange of words that covered more ground than they appeared to. Around 9, a woman named Mrs. Patricia Olson came in to pick up her late husband's Indian Scout, which Ethan had been servicing for her every year since Harold Olson died in 2019. He didn't ride it. She just wanted it maintained, the way Harold had always kept it. "How much do I owe you?" she asked. Ethan said. She looked at him with the expression she always had. "It's more than that. 50, Mrs. Olson." She pressed $300 into his hand and left before he could give it back. There, holding it for a moment. "Put half in the shop drawer and put half in the coffee can." He kept on the shelf behind the counter, the one labeled in faded marker, "For whoever needs it." Jimmy watched all of this. He didn't say anything. He had seen it enough times that it no longer surprised him. But it still moved him every time. That was the kind of man Ethan Walker was. The kind who never needed you to know what he did. The black Mercedes SUV appeared at 10:17 across the street from the shop, and nobody got out for almost 5 minutes. Ethan noticed it the way he noticed everything, without looking directly at it, without giving any sign that he had noticed. He kept working. He heard Jimmy come to the bay door and look. "Truck," Jimmy said. You know it?" "Nope." The door of the Mercedes opened, and Cameron Blake stepped out. 42 years old, tall, tan, wearing a jacket that probably cost more than the Sportster Ethan was currently repairing. He had the walk of a man who had spent his entire adult life having doors open for him, not the kind you push through on your own, the kind that swung open automatically because someone had seen him coming and decided it was easier to let him pass than to find out what happened if they didn't. He crossed the street with 2 men behind him. Not bodyguards exactly, like decorative certainty. He stopped at the bay door. Around the shop, the way people look at things they're already calculating the price of, he said. Ethan didn't look up. "Shop's open. You need work done? I'll get to you." I'm not here for work. Cameron Blake pulled out a business card, actual physical business card, which Ethan found vaguely amusing, and set it on the workbench beside him. Blake. Blake Development Group. You may have heard of us, Ethan said. A small pause. Cameron was used to being recognized, developing the Third and Calder corridor. $38 million mixed-use project. Residential, retail, premium, commercial space. It's going to transform this end of town. Ethan set down his wrench, picked up a rag, wiped his hands slowly. Then he looked at Cameron Blake for the first time, a long, calm, level look that Cameron was not quite prepared for. What does that have to do with me? Ethan said. Your property sits at the center of the development footprint. Property sits where it always sat. Which is a problem, Cameron said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'd like to solve that problem for you. Generously, he reached into his jacket and placed an envelope on the workbench. There's a preliminary offer inside. Well, above market. You'll find it more than fair. Ethan looked at the envelope. Touch it. My shop isn't for sale, he said. Smile didn't waver. Mr. Walker, I understand the emotional attachment, but what we're offering would set you up comfortably for the rest of your life. Retire, travel, enjoy us. I enjoy myself right here, Ethan said. Some time. Think about it. Cameron pushed the envelope slightly forward. The kind of opportunity doesn't come twice. Ethan picked up his wrench. Back to the Sportster. I don't need time, he said. The answer is no. The silence that followed was the kind that happens when someone powerful hears a word they're not used to hearing. Blake picked up, straightened his jacket. He nodded once, with the careful deliberateness of a man deciding something. Stand, he said. We'll be in touch. He left. Jimmy waited until the Mercedes had turned the corner. That, he said. Nobody important, Ethan said. He was wrong about that, but not in the way he expected to be. Inspections started 4 days later. The fire marshal, a guy named Collins, who had never come to Walker's in 20 years and showed up on a Thursday afternoon with a clipboard and a tightness around his mouth that suggested he would rather have been anywhere else. And he walked through the shop, wrote things down, asked questions, cited 2 code violations that Ethan had never heard of and that Jimmy spent 3 evenings reading about online and concluded were technically real, but essentially never enforced anywhere in the county. We'll need you to address these within 30 days. Collins said. Meet Ethan's eyes. All right, Ethan said. Collins left quickly. Jimmy looked at Ethan. Blake did that. Aren't you? Jimmy stopped. Started again. Did that make you angry? Doesn't angry Ethan considered the question with genuine seriousness the way he considered most things. It doesn't fix code violations, he said. Let's look at what needs addressing. On the environmental applicants followed the next week. Gunning. From the city planning office regarding zoning classifications. Then and this one arrived with a particular kind of indignity, a formal complaint filed with the Better Business Bureau alleging that Walker's motorcycle repair had charged a customer for work not performed. The name of the alleged customer turned out to be a shell company that Jimmy traced back to a property holding entity connected to the Blake Development Group in about 45 minutes on his phone. Indicated a complaint, Jimmy said. He was shaking slightly. He made up a customer and filed a fake complaint. That's fraud. We should call a lawyer. We should call the police. Should Jimmy? He can't just... Jimmy. Ethan's voice was quiet, not soft. Quiet. There was a difference. Write down everything. Names, what was said, what was filed, everything. Copies of all of it. And then what? And then we keep working. Jimmy stared at him. That's it? We just keep working? It's not a small thing, Ethan said. That's everything. Complaints mounted. 3 weeks of steady bureaucratic pressure, each one individually manageable, collectively designed to exhaust a man into giving up. Blake was patient and methodical in the way that people who have done this before tend to be. Done this before. Many times in many towns, the way was always the same. Small business, aging owner, personal attachment to a property that was worth more as a development footprint than as a going concern. Apply pressure at the edges, document violations, file complaints. It get expensive and exhausting to hold on. Wait for the moment when fighting back costs more than walking away. It worked almost every time. The tire shop 2 blocks over had already taken a buyout. So had the welding supply company. The diner was holding out, but the owners were in their 70s and their daughter kept telling them to take the money. Fully expected Ethan Walker to fold by the end of the month. He had no idea who he was dealing with. The men came on a Wednesday afternoon. The shop was open. Jimmy was working on a brake job in the first bay, and Ethan was at the back bench replacing clutch plates on a customer's Road King when he heard the truck pull up. Not a customer sound, something else. He had been noticing those kinds of differences for longer than most people understood. He kept working. 4 men came through the bay door. They were large, the kind of large that comes from lifting weights in a particular context, and one was medium-sized with a thin mouth and the eyes of a man performing something. Jimmy turned around from the brake job and went very still. Closed, Ethan said without turning around. It won't be long, said the one with the thin mouth. When you need to leave, we just want to have a conversation. Ethan set down the clutch plate, turned around.